Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections this morning.
Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. Report of registered lobbyists from 5/10/23 will be found in the journal. Additionally, agency reports electronically filed with the legislature can be found on the Nebraska Legislature's website. That's all I have this morning, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Could we proceed with the first items on the agenda?
Mr. President, Legislative Bill 243 on select file. When the legislature left yesterday evening, there was a bracket motion that was voted on, and Mr. President, pursuant to that, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to reconsider the vote on that bracket motion MO 169 with MO 1043.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. Taxes day. We got taxes. Taxes for sale. Just kidding. So this bill has quite a bit in it. Last night I had started looking at the committee statement, and I hadn't quite made it through the committee statement. So some of the pieces in this bill are the 1107 tax credits, income tax, property tax credit, and then growth for schools, and maybe something that's unconstitutional. I'm unclear on that piece. I know there's an AG's opinion requested about the constitutionality of one of the bills that was amended in on general. And yeah, so just going to turn back to, okay, LB 309 amends Nebraska Revised Statute Section 77-1736.01 regarding property tax refunds to increase the interest rate on refunds to 14% from 9%. So property tax refunds, this was by Senator Bostar. So let's look up LB 309. Okay. 309. I remember this vaguely. I'm sorry, Senator Bostar. Okay, so the interest rate, the Department of Revenue estimates no impact on general funds from this bill at no cost to implement the bill. There is no basis to disagree with this estimate. Political subdivision entities responding estimate no fiscal impact from this bill. The Nebraska Association of County Officials estimates the fiscal impact would vary by county with the increase of 5%. And okay. Operative 3 months after. And see what the statement of intent is here. So it's, again, increasing the rate from 9% to 14% for unpaid balances of refunds or claims that political subdivisions owe to taxpayers. So I think that this is sort of trying to incentivize, just looking, I might ask Senator Bostar to speak to this, but I think it's to incentivize political subdivisions to pay taxpayers faster, so that doesn't cost them more. And okay, so that is LB 309. That is amended into 243. And let's take a look at what's next. LB 589 creates a new mechanism to set out the percentage of annual increase that a school district can request regarding their levying authority. AM 977 replaces the original bill and replaces the original formulas with the following. The school district's property tax request authority is calculated by taking the school district's property tax request from the prior year, adding total non-property tax revenue from the prior year, and then increasing the school district's base growth percentage, calculating the following: 3% plus 7/10 of the school district's student enrollment has grown by an average of 3% over the previous 3 years, or 4/10 if the 7/10 provision does not apply, plus a percentage obtained by dividing the annual increase in limited English proficiency learners by the student enrollment multiplied by 15/100ths, a percent, plus a percentage obtained by dividing the annual increase in poverty students by the student enrollment multiplied by 15/100ths. If a school district chooses not to increase its request by the full amount allowed, an increase not used can be carried forward. The amendment then allows for such requests to be overridden by one of two options: a special election called to override with a 60% approval by the voters in such election. The election must be called by either the school board or a petition signed by at least 5% of legal voters within the school district, and allows for a request to be overridden by a 70% vote of the school board, with such override being limited to: for school districts with an enrollment of no more than 471 students, 7%. For school districts with an enrollment between 472 students and 3,044 students, 6%. For school districts with an enrollment between 3,045 students and 10,000 students, 5%. For school districts with an enrollment of 10,001 students or over, 4%. This was not unanimous. Senator Dungan was present, not voting, and then everyone else voted for it. Had opponents from Open Sky, GNSA, Omaha Public Schools, NSEA, and SELF. Okay. Then there was several neutral testifiers. Whenever I see neutral now, I'm like, is it neutral negative, or is it neutral neutral, or is it neutral positive? There we go. LB 783 ends the levying authority of community colleges with the fiscal year 2025-26 and provides a state mechanism for funding community colleges through the state's budgeting system. AM 949 restores the levying authority for capital improvements and additional levying authority, if authorized by the community college boards, to allow additional funding beyond the state of Nebraska, provides to fully fund the community college if the state of Nebraska fails to fully fund a community college in a given year. Motion to include was unanimous. Senator Merman, Governor, Platt Institute, Dairy Association, Corn Growers, Americans for Prosperity, opponents, Community College, Metro Community College, Nebraska Economic Developers Association, Southeast Community College, Nebraska Economic Developers Association, Southeast Community College, Metro Community College again, Central Community College, SCC Milford, Nebraska Farmers Union, SCC Milford, okay. Mid-Plains Community College, Northeastern Community College, Open Sky, Piper Sandler, Self Mid-Plains Community College. All right. That seems like that's about all that's left in there. Mr. President, how much time do I have left?
1 minute, 43 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Okay, so we had 2 hours. I think we started at 9:13. We have about 2 hours, so 11:13 before this goes to cloture. I contemplated giving another income tax, property tax tutorial, but it is May 11th, so I don't know how useful that would be to people because you probably already did your taxes, and the likelihood of people remembering this tutorial for another year.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. you can apply this. A big piece of what this bill is about is property tax relief, and property tax relief in this instance comes through an income tax credit that you have to apply for with your income taxes that takes into account your school district property taxes. So a lot of shifting around, a lot of paperwork, but the end result is property tax relief. So there we go. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Breezy, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I just want to remind folks what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with LB 243. And what does LB 243 do? It increases the statutory minimum in the property tax credit fund, puts in an escalator, removes the 5% cap on the allowable growth rate of the 1107 credit. It puts in place a revenue cap on our schools, but there are several exceptions to that cap. It's an education-friendly cap, in my view. We call it a soft cap. We've accommodated a lot of concerns of the education community with it. Removes the taxing authorities of the community colleges, but replaces their dollars with state dollars. Increases the interest rate on property tax refund and provides some needed changes to the Turk Commission. And with this bill, we have a whole lot at stake here. And remember, as we described last time, that we're talking about a package here. The income taxes, the property taxes, the education funding, and there's a whole lot at stake. Then they're all tied together. You know, what's at stake here? Child care subsidies for Nebraska families, incentives to invest in child care facilities, tax relief for our senior citizens, increased special education funding, increased dollars for our schools, and a lot of tax relief for everyday hardworking Nebraskans. So we do need to advance LB 243. Yesterday I mentioned the amendment that many folks would like to get on. I believe it's AM 1743. And that amendment is very important to some folks. And if you don't believe me, go out in the rotunda and start asking around, and it is very important to a lot of folks, especially the fast-growing school districts and education in general. But at the end of the day, I'm not sure if I need that amendment. In fact, I really don't need that amendment. We can make those tweaks in that amendment next year if we have to. It will work fine the way it is. This language that we're going to change in that amendment, that's language that we've had in these proposals for the last 5 or 6 years. Nobody objected to this language then. It was okay then. I think it is okay now. And so at the end of the day, if we have to advance this as is without AM 1743, I think everything will be fine. We'll keep the package together. We'll provide an enormous amount of property tax relief for everyday Nebraskans. We'll still accomplish what's at stake here within the package: child care subsidies, special ed funding, tax relief for our seniors, et cetera. Let's keep the package together, advance LB 243 with or without the amendment. And I would urge your support going forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Takei, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 243. LB 243 really represents a package of tax relief that is extremely important to all Nebraskans. And you really can't overstate the importance of LB 243 to Nebraska taxpayers. When we take the governor's package as a whole, we have a trio of bills that has a little of something for everyone: for farmers, some property tax relief; for business community, alongside cut in income taxes; and for schools with LB 583, a big boost in funding for special education expenses. I certainly want to commend Senator Breezy, Senator Linehan, and the Revenue Committee and staff for all their work with this package. Like many others have spoken on this topic, property taxes were one of the topics I got the most questions and concerns about from my constituents. As a farmer and a rancher, I will also tell you that property taxes have a direct impact on my operations. What I pay in property tax is a factor in what equipment I should replace, how many head of cattle I might need to sell, what types of crop I should grow, and how many acres I should grow. As many others have said on the mic, there are many people out there who are struggling given the drastic rise in their property taxes, and they need relief. LB 243 is a continued step in the effort to achieve balance among property sales and income tax in Nebraska. I know the legislature has done some great work previously with bills like LB 1107 in 2020 and LB 873 last year. And I and many others want to see changes that move the needle and especially have a direct impact on property taxes. LB 243 has what I would consider one of the most direct proposals for property tax relief as of late. The statewide repeal of community college property tax. Community college account for nearly 6% of the property tax burden statewide, and LB 243 would provide approximately $300 million of direct property tax relief by replacing community college property taxation with the state funding of community colleges, mostly through existing revenue streams. This change will help simplify Nebraska's property tax code and provide more direct relief to property taxpayers. Of course, community colleges play a vital role in our state. They provide efficient, hands-on training at an affordable price for students who are eager to join the workforce in a short amount of time, particularly in high-demand fields like medicine and the trades. Their funding won't be compromised. LB 243 includes a safeguard allowing colleges to levy tax again if the state falls short. Nebraska communities will continue to have a well-funded community college system. However, what taxpayers want to see is one less taxing entity when they open their property tax bill, and they will if LB 243 passes. Right now, we are still in a fairly healthy fiscal situation, and I think that at least some of this money should go back to the taxpayer. I yield the remainder of my time back. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Decay. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is my first time, so I'll get back in the queue. If anybody wants to yield me time, I would happily take it. So I was talking about income taxes. Again, you don't have to give me time because I have 2 more motions after this and motions to reconsider. So, I mean, it's just if you don't want to be voting constantly, then feel free to give me time. Yeah, so the property tax income tax credit fund. So this all came out of 1107. 1107 was the sort of massive, like Titanic size tax package in 2020. And it included the Imagine Act, which was big tax incentives. And then it also included creating this property tax income tax credit fund. And so one of the things in this bill is removing the cap. Did we already remove the cap? Yes, the cap on the growth. Anyways, lots of things to do with the property tax income tax credit fund. But I want to talk for a second about 1107's sort of underlining purpose. So 1107 was to give corporate income tax or corporate tax incentives to businesses here. And I did not vote for it. One of the biggest sticking points I had in that bill was the wages. I opposed the tax incentive package because we could not get an agreement. And by could not get an agreement, literally no one cared. Because you look at the vote on 1107, I think there were 4 or 5 of us that did not vote for the bill. So they didn't need to have an agreement with me. They didn't need me at all. But I don't know how else to explain it. We couldn't get to an agreement on wages. I fundamentally don't like tax incentives for anybody other than low-income people that really truly need them to survive, or tax credits or anything like that, unless it is going to help people who financially cannot survive without them. I don't like tax credits for helping people who don't need them. I mean, if we're going to have a tax credit, I'm certainly going to apply for it because I'm not foolish, but that's not how I fundamentally view our tax code working. Okay, so there's that. But if we are going to have tax incentives, if we are going to give money to corporations because they are bringing jobs to our state, because they are employing a workforce, we should require that they pay a livable wage. And my biggest problem with the tax incentive package of 1107 in 2020 was that we did not require a wage for their employees that would make it so they were not income eligible for public assistance like TANF, SNAP, childcare subsidies, because we were effectively double subsidizing them. And I didn't want to double subsidize companies with tax dollars, especially since it is so difficult to get this legislature to do those things. So what I was pushing for and advocating for was a higher wage requirement of companies that received the tax incentives, high enough that an employee would not qualify for public assistance.
1 minute.
Of course, everyone has their own view. I did not feel like this was unreasonable. Jump forward to 2022 ballot initiative on minimum wage. We have increased wages anyways. So the writing was clearly on the wall in 2020 that this was coming, but we couldn't get that agreement in writing that they had to do these wages. And this is sort of how we can be economic drivers in our economy, is to offer the carrot of tax incentives to get businesses to help infuse more revenues into our tax base. So all interconnected. Maybe we should do some more about it.
That's your time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Kauth, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. Our tax package this morning, we're looking at LB 243. We put together a lot of different bills with this. We have gone very, very close to the end of the session, so we needed to make sure we had a lot of things taken care of. One of the things that Senator Erdman had brought to us was LB 28, changing provisions relating to decisions on appeals under the Turk Commission. Now, Senator Erdman knows pretty much everything about Turk, and he came in and gave a really good explanation of how that system works. And I'm wondering if he would be willing to yield to a question.
Senator Erdman, would you yield to some questions?
I certainly would.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. So with the Turk, and I had never heard the phrase Turk before, so that is the Tax Equalization and Review Commission, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So can you explain what it is that they do and how their process works?
Okay, I would. So what happens, Senator Kauth, is you get your notice of your valuation of your property, and if you're not in agreement that the valuation is correct, and you go to the County Board of Equalization and they do not agree with you, but with the assessor, then you have an opportunity to appeal that decision to Turk. And once you make an application with Turk and you have filed with them, then you get an opportunity to go in front of a single commissioner if your property is worth less than $1 million, and you get to then share your case with that commissioner, and then Turk makes a decision whether the county has made a correct determination on your valuation. And what happens going forward, if it takes 2 years and sometimes up to 3 for Turk to make a decision, you, the taxpayer, have to pay the taxes at the valuation they assigned you, not the valuation that you assume it should be, until they make a decision. And so it has been there's been a backlog of Turk cases. Some people have waited 10 years to have a hearing. And so they eventually, if the Turk board finds in the taxpayer's favor, they have paid the improper tax for 10 years. So I think it's important that when you file an application or an appeal with Turk, that it should be heard expediently and there should be a decision made sooner rather than later. And so what we're trying to do with the bill that's included in 243 is we're going to expand the Turk board from 3 to 4, which will increase the number of hearings that they can have, which then will expedite the number of hearings that will be completed, which will help the taxpayer understand what their valuation should be. So that's the opportunity the taxpayer has. Rather than going to court, they apply for appeal to Turk.
Thank you very much. And thank you for doing all the work on that, because I had, first of all, no idea that that was happening. It seems like a serious injustice to charge someone something for years and then say, oops, I'm wrong, and not have them not be able to be compensated for that. Is there another part to your bill?
There was another part, and it's in the amendment. The amendment, what I had originally stated was the fact that in the case of making an appeal with Turk, if they haven't had a hearing and a decision rendered before your next tax statement was due, then the valuation would revert back to the original valuation until the decision was made. And if the decision was made against the taxpayer, then they would have to go back and pick up the taxes from the day you filed, plus interest on the taxes you did owe. And the amendment that we have, that Senator Breezy was gracious enough to include, would strike that part. And it would just leave in place expanding the Turk board from 3 to 4.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for all your work protecting taxpayers in this state.
Thank you.
I thought this was a fascinating issue. Again,
One
it's something
minute.
that we don't see. Thank
One
you very
minute.
much. Thank you, Mr. President. It's something that most people don't know about. It's one of the intricacies of our government. We have people like Senator Erdman who dig in deep and find out these issues that are causing people harm, and he works to equalize them and make them more fair. So I really appreciate all your work on that, Senator Erdman. I yield my time.
Thank you, Senator Cowell. Senator Mosier, you're recognized to speak.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I was wondering if Senator Clements would respond to a couple of questions.
Senator Clements, would you yield to some questions?
Yes, I would.
So I'm looking at the handout that a couple senators brought around, and there's a chart on the back of this handout that says general fund budget growth, and there's a bunch of squiggly lines on a graph here. Does the fact that that line ends below the 20-year average shock you?
No, in my opinion, that's a good thing. It shows the change in spending that we've had from year to year. Looks like the average is a little over 3% growth in spending, but the drop shows that we are spending less.
So it's not a graph of how much money we've got in the bank?
No, budget growth means spending growth.
And the line that's drawn there across is not zero.
No, that's the average, 20-year average of how much we spend, increase in spending per year.
So in 22 years, how many times has spending growth gone below zero?
Oh, below zero?
Once.
Twice.
Well, once it got,
Was right at zero once and once at -4.5, only one major year.
yeah. So really this chart is if you're a conservative spender, this chart is a positive.
Yes, the ending part of it, yes.
Okay. And then back to the other side, where we wind up on the right-hand column here in the negative, we have a flow of money here where we start with 500 million and then we subtract expenses and add revenue and we wound up in the negative. But when we started at 550 or it's 550 million in the positive, the change is 127, but we really have, if there was better light in here, I could read this. We really have 393 million in our general fund.
Yes.
Yeah. So this particular handout, I'm not sure I don't know everybody's initials all that well. I don't know what point they're trying to make, but I'm interested in hearing their interpretation of this. I don't find this alarming. I think this chart is a good sign, is that we're
You're
adjusting.
talking about line 28, I believe, on the very far right column showing the dollar ending balance in general funds of 393 million, yes.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Thank you. I appreciate your explanation of all that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Clements and Mosier. Senator Clements, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 243 in opposition to the bracket motion. And as I was looking through the committee statement, I had some comments. The bottom of the first page talking about the property tax credit. That's what I call the tier 1 credit, the amount that comes off of your property tax bill from the county. And currently, we have $313 million that's allocated to that. And it is, right now, it's giving $136 per $100,000 of valuation for a farm. And it's going to grow from 313 million. It's projected out to 2029 to 560 million. But it increases each year, so that $136 on 100,000 of value would, by the end of this biennium, 2025, is $185, and 27, $210, year 2029, $241, and so it's going to be doubling over a period of years, and I'm pleased to see that. It's good to allocate money and to have the bill they get from the county is going to be decreasing as these increases in credit take effect. Then I heard some discussion about the changes in the Turk Tax Equalization Review Commission, and I also am in favor of that, so that people who have to wait to have a hearing on their tax protest don't end up getting penalized. I have applied to Turk 2 times, and I had 1 win and 1 loss, and it's a slow process, and I had to continue paying my tax while I was waiting and while the valuation was increasing. And I appreciate this is going to give some relief when a person is waiting to appeal for the hearing, that the valuation isn't going up while they're still protesting a previous year. The other item I noted here was the interest rate on tax refunds is up from 9% to 14% if you overpaid your taxes or the county owes you money back on taxes, I suppose, especially if you got a favorable hearing from Turk. They're going to have to pay 14% to the taxpayer, which if we pay late now, we pay 14%. So I think it's fair to have it both ways, and that will encourage local governments to resolve their payments that they owe taxpayers if they have refunds coming. Now, the one thing I was wondering, would Senator Breezy yield to a question?
Senator Breezy, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
I had been hearing about a 3%
1 minute.
limiting growth. We'll have to talk about this more, but there's 7%, 6%, 5%, 4%, and like to have some discussion on why it's not just 3% for everyone. And would you be willing to continue that later?
Yes, I'd be happy to talk about that, but that 4, 5, 6, and 7, that's the additional amount that a school board with a supermajority vote can access over and above the 3%. Of course, you have 3% plus those factors relative to enrollment growth, poverty student growth, LAP growth, but then you also have the ability of that school board to access additional dollars. Again, 4, 5, 6, and 7. It was stair-stepped in that way. We did that way back 4 or 5 years ago in LB 1084 at the suggestion of some folks in the education community. I'm not exactly sure where those.
That's the time, Senators. Thank you, Senators Clements and Breezy.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Blood, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Fellow Senators, friends all, I stand opposed to the reconsideration and in support of LB 243, but I'm hoping to maybe see some tweaks that I know some people are working on. I listened yesterday and I did get some of my answers. Allegedly, there are a lot of things that were worked on and now the community colleges are all on board. You know, I noted yesterday when I was looking through the committee statement, I think it was LB 783 had 22 opponents in the hearing. And I think that was also the one that Senator Dungan did not vote out of committee as well. So obviously there has been a lot of stress, a lot of negotiations going on with this bill. And so everybody that's been involved to make it a better bill, I just want to personally say thank you, because I believe our tax system has been askew for decades. And I think of those of us that have followed the legislature for the last few decades, the big news is always biggest tax break ever for all Nebraskans. I remember when Senator Conrad was a senator, that was the big thing, biggest tax break for all Nebraskans. And then Ricketts, biggest tax break for all Nebraskans. And so I'm sure that's what Governor Pillen is going to do as well. But the fact that we keep doing that should tell you something right there. And what it tells us is that we've never been able to come up with anything that's sustainable. I think we're getting closer. I'm not sure that we're quite there. I've heard everything that Senator Linehan, Senator Breezy, Senator Clements, and everybody has had to say. But I keep running the numbers and I'm not getting that same answer. So I'm going to keep listening. I'm also going to give a plug like I always do, much like Senator Erdman does for his tax proposal. Is, you know, my priority bill, which of course we will never get to this year. It was in reference to unfunded and underfunded mandates. And I truly believe in my heart that I have peers that never want to see us eliminate those, because we want to be able to spend your tax dollars however the heck we want. And I personally think that we should be more beholden to you and give you the opportunity on the ballot to decide whether we should ever pass a law unless first we can show how we will pay for it. Which kind of makes sense, which is how you run your household budgets, which is how you run a successful business. You know, we always hear the silliness about run the state like a business. But boy, if we ran our businesses like we run the state in many instances, we would not be in business for very long. So I know I'm a broken record on this. I know that this fight is probably never going to come to any kind of resolution when it comes to unfunded and underfunded mandates. But as long as I'm in this body, I'm going to keep educating the public on it. I'm going to let you know that last year we got through first round and had the votes, and they purposely on the next round adjourned early so we couldn't get to it. So the only people they really hurt, it wasn't me, it was the taxpayers. And this year, there were culture war bills that were more important, I guess, than letting you decide on a ballot whether you wanted to stop unfunded mandates. I don't agree with how the agenda went this year, but I am not the speaker, and I had no say-so, and nor was I asked. So I just want people to know what's going on. We've had a lot of omnibus bills that have up to like 20, 25 bills included in them. I encourage you, if you're a fan of watching the legislature, that you go online, you look at that bill number, you go through the committee statement, and you make sure you know what's being passed. Because on some of the stuff that's gone through, there will be repercussions. and they're going to become someone else's problem here in a future legislative body. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Aguilar has some guests in the north balcony. 55 fourth graders from Gates Elementary in Grand Island. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak, and this is your last time before your close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues. Okay, so I was talking about the 1107 bill and just the pay, how much we're paying people, and that's really why I was not in support ultimately of 1107. If we had come to an agreement to require wages that made employees not income eligible for public assistance like SNAP and TANF and childcare subsidies, then I was amenable to the tax incentives. But the way I viewed it is that we were double subsidizing employers by not doing that, and not only double subsidizing them, but in allowing them to get the tax incentives but not pay their employees a livable wage, we were really increasing the burden on government and taxpayers more so than just the tax incentives. And what I mean by increasing the burden, if we have more people who qualify for public assistance, then we have more people who are really in economic crisis. And that's going to cost us all more money in a lot of different ways. Some of them being increased population of incarceration, increased instability in the home, which might lead to an increase in our children involved in child welfare. So it just, to me, wasn't strong policy. And I think if you could say one thing about me, you probably could say a lot of things. But one thing is that I really like strong, well thought out public policy. So I didn't support it. And I still wish we would have done something about the wages. And then there's the issue of the property tax credit fund and how much money we're putting in there and how we're funding government. I will say that Senator Linehan and I have many disagreements on policies, but one that we have always agreed on is that property taxes are a terrible way to fund public education. And so I appreciate, even though I don't agree with the 1107 mechanism, I have always appreciated her willingness to make that happen. And also, she might not remember this, but she taught me how that all worked. So the tutorials that I have given you on how to get your property tax income tax credit are because Senator Linehan actually educated me on what all of that was, because it made no sense to me. And that was like 3 years ago. So thank you for that, Senator Linehan. And someday I'm going to try and get you in trouble with foundation tax pass-throughs. So just little tax jokes. Anyways, okay, so LB 243, it has a lot of things in it. So I was on my last time I was talking about LB 309 and the change in interest rate relating to property taxes. I was going to ask Senator Bostar a question about it. Okay, well, hopefully I'm not misrepresenting it, but I think LB 309 is basically incentivizing local taxing authorities to pay the taxpayer back their refunds in a more timely manner by increasing the amount of interest that they would have to pay if they didn't do it in a timely manner. That's my interpretation of it.
1 minute.
I, of course, always am willing to stand for correction on that, but that is my interpretation on it. So, okay, what other bills are in LB 243? And then LB 243 itself is increasing the amount of money that's going into the property tax credit fund. And again, like I said previously, I'm not a big fan of tax credits and tax incentives, but I'm also not a fool. Like when I do my own taxes, I am going to apply for them. And I have applied for the property tax credit fund because I own my home. And so obviously I'm not going to just not apply for it. So I do encourage people to make sure and check your taxes. You can always do an amendment if you filed them and didn't collect on this, but check your taxes and make sure that you have applied for the property tax credit fund on your income taxes this year. The first year, the amount.
That's your time,
Thank you.
Senator Kavanaugh. Thank you. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. It's the last day of a long week. I know everybody's in a good mood because it's a 4-day weekend coming up. I, too, am looking forward to a little bit of a break from this place. So last night I was talking about the elections and overrides and things like that. And I continue to have that problem with this bill. But I was pushed my light because when Senator Blood was talking about community colleges, and so I appreciate Senator Blood's comments about that conversation. And I hadn't talked about community colleges up to this point. And when this bill, the bill that's part of this bill, I don't remember what the bill number is, actually 783, I think. When that bill was first proposed, I thought it was a real non-starter to take away the levy authority of our community colleges. And I appreciate the committee working with the community colleges to eliminate their opposition and get the bill in a shape that they're comfortable with and feel like that they will still have their own autonomy. And my original problem with that was in part that we have a great community college in Omaha. I know other people have feelings about their community colleges, but Metro Community College is a fantastic community partner with all the businesses, the schools, the high schools, and our community in general in Omaha, and it's really helped with the job market, preparing people for the jobs that we need. I talked about the community college scholarship grant in the bill 2 nights ago, I think it was, and how important that is because it helps people who are taking certificate programs and things that are maybe not otherwise eligible for Pell eligible or other financial aid, and that people are much more likely to graduate if they get access to that financial aid, and it helps people get access to some tuition assistance for needed jobs like welding or computer science or new energy fields. But the reason I'm talking about that now is why it's important that community colleges are able to have, as this bill adjusts, have their own levying authority for capital improvements and things, because we've seen in the last decade or more, at least Metro Community College has added these programs, improved, the Culinary Institute, the construction program, the welding program, the CDL program, things that are really needed and bring great value to our community. And they're able to do that because of their ability to be dynamic and respond and make changes. And if we put too much pressure on them to have to come to the legislature and have us control everything that they do, it will stifle their ability to make those quicker improvements and changes. And so I really do think that this particular part will have an impact on people's property tax bill because they will see that line item go down. But it will also, the way it's crafted, will allow our community colleges to continue to be the great asset they are to our community in Omaha. So I appreciate that about this. I don't want to leave out the other community colleges. I'm just not as familiar, but I do know that I think it's Southeast Community College. Is that the one here in Lincoln? Southeast Community College. They have the diesel mechanic repair program, which I know is an essential one for this for the state. And then in North Central is the one in Norfolk, has driven by their campus there. And if anybody from community college is listening, I would of course love to come visit your facilities and see what other offerings you have in those other community colleges. But I think it is really important that those specific ones in each of these communities, thank you, Mr. President, are able to take the feedback from their community and offer new programs, new certificates, new ways of getting people prepared for the workforce that that community needs. If we bring in a new employer into, say, Norfolk, and they don't have enough people who are trained in whatever that field is, the community college there could stand up a program more quickly, a certificate, get people trained up so that we have enough people to work there so that the business can grow and move forward. And so that's what one of the great things about community colleges, services they provide to our communities and our businesses, and why they do need this, still that ability to act independently and be dynamic. So I appreciate the changes to LB 783 that are included in this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And good morning, colleagues. I rise today again just to express, I think, some of my questions and concerns with LB 243. I do rise opposed to the motion to reconsider by Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. But earlier, off the mic, I was speaking with my colleague, Senator Blood, and she was mentioning my present not voting on part of this package and on the package in its entirety. And I just wanted to speak to that for a moment to maybe further articulate that. As I said yesterday, for those who weren't watching at home late at night, I'll reiterate it. There are a number of things in this package that I think are really well thought out and I think very beneficial to Nebraska. It's clear that property tax is something we're going to talk about for a long remainder of this session, and I think we're going to continue talking about it. But this bill does really, I think, seek to address part of the underlying problem of property taxes and provide actual property tax relief for a number of Nebraskans. So I do applaud my fellow colleagues on the Revenue Committee for addressing these issues. I do, again, want to thank Senator Breezy for his hard work reaching across to a number of stakeholders and bringing folks to the table. And I did see in this package a number of things that he did that demonstrated actual desire to reach compromise. And so I genuinely want to thank him for his work on that, because I know this has been a passion project of his for quite some time. That being said, obviously you don't have to like everything in the package. And particularly there was one part in here that I was troubled by, and that was LB 589 as amended with into this by 977. And that's what we've been talking about with regard to the tax asking authority. Again, this is a soft cap, I think is what it's being called, on schools, on their raising of their tax asking authority. And it essentially creates a tiered approach where schools can all have 3% growth. And then if they want to go above that 3% growth, they can have a set amount they're allowed to go above that if they get, I believe it's 70% of their school board or 60% of a vote of the public. Now, the issues that I had with that, I outlined a little bit yesterday, but I wanted to articulate it again, given that Senator Blood was asking about my reason for being present, not voting. One is just that I have a fundamental disagreement with the idea that we should be creating these caps at all. My concern is that when we begin to create these caps, we place our schools in situations where at times of extraordinary need or in times of growth that they're going to need, they're going to be placed in a bad situation. I understand these caps are relatively large for at least some school districts, and they provide some wiggle room. But given the fact that we don't know the nuance that's going to go into every single situation, it just concerns me when this structure gets put in place. And even if these caps in and of themselves are appropriate with regards to the amount of growth that is allowed, my concern would be that once this structure is in place, future legislatures could very easily come back and start to reduce the size of these caps and start to limit that even more. And so creating the structure in the first place is something that I just have a fundamental disagreement with that policy. And so that was part of my hesitation about that. In addition to that, as many of us have expressed, I generally just have a concern when we place the vote of the public that's necessary to override that at 60%. We have a long and robust history of Democratic elections needing something over, 50%. And I think that number just makes sense. Having that set at 60% kind of flies in the face of the general Democratic notions that we have in place both here in Nebraska and elsewhere. And I think that if a majority of the people in a school district want to go over that asking authority, they should allow that. And so that was part of my other issue. A third problem that I have with this is with this structure being put in place. And essentially making this a function of the school board and requiring a vote of 70% of the school board to override that tax asking authority or exceed it past that original 3%.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am concerned that that is going to be the entire thing that every school board election is about from now on. And I think school boards handle a number of important issues. People running for school board have to answer a number of questions. But if from now into perpetuity, school board elections are fundamentally predicated on whether or not somebody is going to vote to override that tax asking authority or not, I think it's going to be doing a disservice to others in the district when they might want to be hearing about other issues on the school board. So to Senator Blood's question, those are some of the concerns that I had. Again, I did see Senator Breezy work very hard on this to reach some compromise, and so that's why I was not opposed to it, but my present not voting was due to some of those questions and concerns that I had moving forward, and I think it's important to continue having that conversation. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just sitting here reading some more of the bill, and of course, I thought, after talking about the community college, I thought it might be illustrative to folks just to know how much we're kind of talking about. So in Douglas County, just pulled up my property levy information for tax district 100, which I guess is where I live. And our total consolidated levy is 2.24121 per $100 of assessed value. So basically, if your house is assessed at what, $1,000, you'd pay $22.40 or something like that. Or if it's assessed at $100, it'd be $2.24 would be your taxes. Is that right? It's per $100. Did I say that right? Well, anyway, so but for, you have the city of Omaha is 46 cents, which is 20% of the total levy. We have to pay for the city county building, which has a separate line item, which is about 1.5 cents. We have county itself is 29.5 cents. The ESU, which is about $0.015. The learning community, which is another 1.6 cents. MUD, which does not list an amount here. Then we have Metro Area Transit, which is the bus service. It's about 6.5 cents. And then you have the NRD, Natural Resource District, 3.5 cents. The Omaha Public School, which is the single largest line item, 1.23109 is its total levy, basically almost $1.25. And then you have Metro Community College is 9.5 cents. So that is 4.238% of my total property tax bill. And it would be basically anybody in that area's, give or take. I mean, if you're in one of the other school districts or maybe outside the state of Omaha, it might be a little bit different. But if you're in city of Omaha and OPS, it should be about the same. So 4.5% decrease in property taxes would be a pretty significant one. As I said earlier, the amendment does preserve some of the taxing authority for the community colleges in situations of capital improvement funds. And of course, if the state fails, if we fail to meet our obligation to those community colleges to make sure that we're funding them, that they would get some of their funding authority back. So I thought that was at least relevant information as we're having this conversation. Could look up other people's community colleges to see what their percentages are. Maybe they're higher in places that don't have as much other property taxes layered on top of that. I don't know if Lincoln has a separate taxing authority for their Lincoln bus, or if Norfolk, which I always like to use as an example, has a separate taxing authority for their transit, which I don't know if anybody knows this, is called forklift, which I think is one of the best names for a transit authority or transit in the state. I don't see Senator Dover's not right there right now, but I was in Norfolk not that long ago, and it was right after they'd announced the name of it, and it was on the cover of their paper, and I was so excited because I thought, I just love a good, clever name. It makes it more enjoyable. And again, not to be the Norfolk tourism authority for you, but they have a really cool Main Street in Norfolk and Senator Dover brought a bill that would help change the I don't know what you call it, entertainment districts, so that Norfolk
1
can
minute.
expand their entertainment district. But anyway, I'm digressing because I like to talk about things like that. But anyway, like I said, this particular direct state aid community colleges, I think people will notice. We've done these other types of property tax relief. So, like Senator Breezy, Senator Linehan have done a lot on that particular work. Some of it people don't notice on their actual property tax bill. But I think this one in particular, people will be able to notice. You can look at your bill. You can see, I will see a 4.2% decrease on the actual bill because of that. So I think that is important, that people will be able to see it. The property tax credit fund and those sorts of things people get off on their income taxes are a little bit harder just to see. But when you get your tax bill, you look at your levies, you will see a decrease in that. So I think that is a significant thing. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to close on the motion. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh waives closing on the motion to reconsider. There is a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
14 ayes, 2 nays to go under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Conrad, Vargas, Bostar, Ibaugh, Moser, Clemens, Erdman, Merman, Arch, Von Gillern. Please record your presence. The House is under call. Senator Kavanaugh, we have 3 senators, Vargas, Bostar, Arch, who are not here. How do you wish to proceed? Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. We will proceed with the vote. Senators, the question is the motion to reconsider. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
1 ayes, 35 nays on the motion to reconsider, Mr. President.
The motion fails. Mr. Clerk, for items. And I raise the call.
Mr. President, the next item, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh would move to recommit the bill to committee.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to yield my opening to Senator John Kavanaugh.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you have 9 minutes and 53 seconds.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. I guess I just, of course, I would love to talk more about transit authorities and things like that, which I do find very interesting. And, sometimes you start on a digression and then it leads to another digression. And actually, this made me think, looking at the taxing authority of the metro area transit, before I was in the legislature, I was interested in a lot of things. I mean, still interested in a lot of things. But one thing I researched was the funding of our metro area transit authority. And I was interested in it because we have a nice bus system in Omaha. We've added the bus rapid transit to that, which is we call the Orbit. But they funded that through, federal, what would at the time called Tiger grants. I don't know what they're called now, but federal funds for transit, funded it through money from the MUD, Metro, the utility district. They help pay for the natural gas buses and money from the city and other sort of, I think maybe even some money from the Environmental Trust. But anyway, they got all this extra funds to be able to add a service. And the reason that's relevant is the metro area transit, as I pointed out earlier, has a levy authority of, their levy taxing authority is 6.5 cents, 6.743 cents. And that they have that, I think their statutory taxing authority is up to 10 cents, but they have a cap. And this is one of the reasons that I've always been suspicious of caps, because they have a cap in growth where they can only grow their total dollar amount of tax asking, which is the style of cap that we've been proposed here, a certain amount every year. And they actually are technically a subdivision of the city. So they have to go to the city council and ask them to, so their board votes, then it goes to the city council, and the city council votes, and then that sets their tax asking. But they can only go up a certain amount, and then they could only go over it a certain amount with a supermajority, like we're talking about here. But what has in effect has happened is their levy has dropped from 10 cents to the 6.5 cents over years of growth in valuations, by adding more to the city and things like that. But their total dollar amount that they have to serve the community has not gone up. And the reason that's a problem for them is, and for the city of Omaha, is they're not able to expand the services that they offer. They can't add new bus routes. If they add a new bus on a route, so if they go from every half hour to every 15 minutes, they essentially have to take that bus that runs in between from another route. So they can't actually provide more services. And then the problem we have is we're attempting in Omaha, we've got, changed some zoning requirements to allow for transit-oriented development, which increases density. And those things go hand in hand with the reason you'd have more density is you have fewer parking spots. So more people can live there. And the reason you can have fewer parking spots is because people can ride mass transit, which is how big cities like New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., they all have more density because they have robust transit systems. And of course, like I said, I love our metro area transit. I like the Orbit. I ride the number 11 bus, which I always think is great. The 11 bus runs on Leavenworth Street. So 11 on Leavenworth runs right by my house. I can take it to downtown. I can take it right to the courthouse. I can take it from my house to Exarban, which I have done with my kids. I mean, I could walk to Exarban. It's only about 1.5 miles, but it picks up a block from my house and goes to downtown, but it doesn't run all that frequently. I'd like, the ability for a more regular bus. But the reason they can't expand the services is because they don't have the ability to be dynamic, like I talked about with community colleges, and increase their tax asking up to their authority and provide more services. And of course, we all say, well, we're trying to get taxes down. We don't want to, put more burden on people. But the question of taxes is fundamentally, what do you get for it, right? We're not just taxing people just for the sake of taxing people. We want to get something for it. And the idea of transit is more people can be moved around the city with fewer cars on the road, we put less wear and tear on our roads, more access to jobs. People can use their money some other way other than buying car, fuel, things like that. All of the reason we invest in mass transit is it gets us a more efficient society that will, in the long run, save us money and increase the overall value to our communities. So that's why we do it. That's why Norfolk's got a forklift, right? Is to help people get to jobs, help people get to entertainment, to spend their dollars in other ways. So that's a question of return on investment and why we would allow for that sort of thing. But it is a great example of where a tax cap has caused a slowed ability to be dynamic and to grow something that is bringing value to our community. And we're having a bigger discussion about transit in the city of Omaha with the streetcar and those sorts of things. I would say the other part that maybe people don't know about is our Metro Transit is going to become a regional transit authority, thanks to a bill passed by this legislature before I got here, brought by Senator Wayne, which will allow Metro area transit to expand beyond the borders of the city of Omaha. We'll have an elected board, so more oversight, more accountability. They'll be able to set their own taxing levy, and they will be able to, the city of Ralston would be able to join if they want, or Bellevue, Papillion, La Vista, Gretna, Bennington, would be able to join as part of the regional transit authority, and we could have broader services, bigger base, providing for more people to get around in a more modern way. Hopefully, maybe expand our bus rapid transit. Currently goes from Westroads Mall to downtown, and it is great. It's very fast. You can get from Westroads to downtown in about 15 minutes, I think, when I rode it. And they have those elevated platforms. You walk right on. It's fantastic. That's another. I can walk to the bus rapid transit, but really, if I'm really going downtown, I'm going to take the 11 bus because it's right by my house. But anyway, so that's one of the reasons I have historically had a problem with caps, is because I've seen how it has restricted the growth of our transit authority. So with that, I would encourage your green vote on a motion to recommit. And thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Dungan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I'm rising again just to continue the conversation on LB 243. Excuse me, I haven't had enough water yet this morning. I apologize. I keep coughing into the microphone. It's been a long week and a late night. I see some pages here that were here with us late last night as well. So welcome back. I appreciate you all volunteering to be here late nights and coming in the morning. One of the things I wanted to touch on with regards to property tax is a conversation that we actually started during the general file debate. And it's something that has sort of been percolating in my brain ever since I started hearing about the property tax issue. And I think it fundamentally comes down to, who do these property taxes help? And one thing I said yesterday that I think is fundamentally true is that property taxes obviously help urban and rural areas. And I think it's an incredibly important issue across the entire state. And property taxes do hit, I think, a lot of our agricultural folks a lot harder than maybe some of the urban people like myself realize, just given the fact that we don't own that kind of farmland or ag land, and we don't see how much those taxes can affect you. But one of the people, or populations of people, that I think sometimes gets left behind in a conversation with regard to taxes are people who don't own property. I think we had a conversation that Senator Hunt and others brought up during the general file debate on this, which is, the property tax relief we talk about all the time is great, but there's an entire swath of people here in Nebraska who are not property owners, who don't benefit from property tax credits, who don't benefit from either direct or indirect aid when it comes to property tax reduction. And I understand that there's other programs that we have in place to help folks, but I do think that it's important that sometimes we take a step outside of what is normal to us here in the legislature and understand that there's a whole other swath of folks that we need to consider and think about as well. Not everybody's a property owner. And the fact that we only, it seems like oftentimes talk about property taxes because that's what we assume everybody cares about, it does feel like oftentimes we forget our friends who are renters and don't really think about how these pieces of legislation or these bills could help them or really don't provide any benefit to them at all. I have a number of friends who still rent on a regular basis. They rent apartments, they rent entire houses, and these are people in all sorts of different financial situations. These are people with kids. These are people who are, young professionals, older professionals, people in the service industry. And so I think we just oftentimes get a little bit myopic in our views in here with regards to what the majority of people actually need. I don't know how many people in the legislature don't own their home. I don't know how many of our 49 senators rent. But I do think that when you talk to your friends who are not property owners about the amount of time and effort we put into property taxes, it kind of makes their eyes glaze over a little bit because it doesn't affect them. And so that is not to say that property tax reduction or property tax relief isn't important. It is. But I just think it's really vital that we remember there's a whole group of people that this doesn't have an effect on. And I know that there was a conversation as well on General File about whether or not property tax reduction or property tax relief trickles down to benefit renters. And I can tell you, as somebody who rented for a very long time until recently, your rent always goes up. No matter what property tax reductions happen, no matter what property tax relief is granted, your rent goes up every single year. Now, maybe it's arguable that your rent would go up more if there was not property tax relief, and I don't have the numbers on that, and I don't have the statistics on that. I'm not a landlord. I don't deal with that, but I can tell you as somebody who's rented multiple times that thank you, Mr. President, your rent does increase every single year. And so the reason I say that is I think as we continue this conversation with regards to property tax relief and property tax reduction, we're going to talk about it again next year. I'm sure we're going to talk about it again in future legislative sessions past next year. I would just like us to have a little bit of focus on how we can give maybe some assistance financially to renters, whether that is through some sort of financial aid or some sort of property tax adjacent reduction. But I just think it's going to be imperative that we look out for all Nebraskans and we remember the people who don't own their homes or own property as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Senator Day, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am just getting here this morning after a late morning with my kids. And quite frankly, I do not like the underlying bill itself, not because I'm not in favor of property tax relief, but because it once again directly pits our schools against our taxpayers and putting a cap on the growth on school districts and attempting to apply a one-size-fits-all solution to property tax relief is not a realistic solution in a state where school districts vary greatly, particularly in the amount of growth that they are currently experiencing and the amount of growth that they will experience in the future. I don't like the underlying bill, but I do appreciate Senator Breezy's efforts to find an amendment to create somewhat of an exception for school districts like Gretna, Elkhorn, and Bennington, who are growing very quickly. I do have part of the Gretna School District in my current district, my current legislative district, and Gretna has seen a growth of anywhere between 10 to 15% in the last several years. So capping that at what I think, I'm not sure what the percentage is. I apologize. Like I said, I'm just getting here and frustrated by the fact that we haven't gotten to the amendment yet. But I appreciate the attempt to find a solution for very quickly growing school districts like Gretna, Bennington, and Elkhorn. And I hope that at some point we can get to the amendment because I would like to be able to support the underlying bill. But my concern is that it will cause too much damage for districts, school districts like those that are in my district. And so it would be my wish that we could maybe move beyond what we're doing. I don't know how much time we have left. We probably have maybe an hour or so before cloture. I would like to get to the amendment, and I will hopefully be discussing this with my colleagues in the hopes that we can maybe pull some of these motions and get to the amendment so we can get to a vote on the amendment before we get to cloture. I will look into a little bit more on the details of this because, again, I'm surprised that we haven't gotten to the amendment yet this morning. And I will yield the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Day. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am going to be against LB 243 with or without the amendment because I'm opposed to AM 977 that was adopted. I feel like there's a portion of this amendment that I feel like we have blocked for many years in a row that came through this year. The part about 60% of voters needing to approve an increase beyond any kind of arbitrary limit, any limit that's provided in this proposal. So special elections are really expensive, and if a school wanted to increase their spending, they'd have to call for one every single year, which is the point. I mean, they don't want them to increase the spending at all. But it makes no sense to me that we would have an election where 60% of voters have to, agree on something for it to even pass. And then we have further dumb language in here is calling it legal voters. Legal voters is the most redundant phrase. We don't have to say that voters are legal or illegal. You would never say illegal voters in a state statute. We don't need to define if they're legal or not. If they're voting, if they're voters, they're legal. If they're not eligible to vote, then we already have language defined in statute to prevent them from doing that. But this portion of the amendment says, a school district's property tax request may exceed its property tax request authority by an amount approved by a 60% majority of legal voters voting on the issue at a special election called for such purpose upon the recommendation of the school board of such school district or upon the receipt by the county clerk or election commissioner of a petition requesting an election signed by at least 5% of the legal voters of the school district. The part of it is line 10, page 3, where it says, they may exceed the property tax request authority by a 60% majority of legal voters. Imagine if we changed all of our election statutes to say, we elect the legislature, we elect the governor, we elect school board by a 60% majority of legal voters. Well, guess what? Now there's precedent to do that. Now we have that in statute. We no longer can just have a vote where 50.1% of the voters can decide how something goes. This is no longer a majority. Why not change it to 2/3 of the voters like we do here in the legislature when we have to get 33 votes for something? This isn't the way elections should work. And for that reason, I'm against this whole thing. And in past years, this didn't fly either. So it's really a testament to the lack of independence of this body. And even listening to you guys speak with your choreographed questions to each other, question and answer, talking about this on the record. The script that you're reading says things like, the governor's budget proposal, as stated by the governor in this proposal, we can thank the governor for this proposal. You guys have no mind of your own at all. You trust the governor, you believe what he says, that's fine. You know, if one of my friends from the coffee clutch in Columbus was elected to be governor too, I'd probably believe him. But again, it's really beneath the dignity of the work that we get to do here. Talk about why you support it. Don't just say the governor said. I would be mortified if my friend was the governor and I said, well, my friend said it's okay to do. Like, I would make up some reason at least of why I've supported or opposed it that made it sound like
1
I at
minute.
least came to it independently. But we aren't even bothering to do that here. I'm against LB 243 writ large because I don't like the limit on local school authorities to raise the limit. And I don't like putting into state statute that something takes 60% of voters to pass something, let alone that it takes 60% of legal voters to pass something. I think every time we talk about a Nebraskan or a voter or anything, maybe we should start using redundant language like that in statute and see how that goes as a precedent. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Hunt, for that jumping off point. So I have actually looked at this issue before because when this bill came up last year and it had the phrase legal voters in there, kind of I had the same reaction Senator Hunt did. So I looked into it a little bit, and I would just, for an example, Article 3, Section 3 of the Constitution, second power reserved by referendum, says the second power reserved is a referendum which may be invoked by petition against any act or part of the legislature except those making appropriations. So, but then it basically says petition invoking referendum shall be signed by no less than 5% of registered voters of the state, distributed as required by the initiative and filed with Secretary of State. So this is registered voters. So the reason I put that up is that Senator Hunt was referencing the use of the word legal voters. So this is an addendum. This is a book that, if you all don't have this or haven't read it, it's the Nebraska State Constitution, a referencing guide, second edition. It's fantastic. I love it. It's great read because it has the Constitution, but then it has some explanation of case law and things like that come along with it. And so the reason I'm pointing that out is the commentary in here talks about by a referendum process, the people can circulate a petition calling for a vote on acts passed by the legislature. The convention of 1920 lowered the requirement first adopted in 1912 from 10% of legal voters to 5% of electors. So the Constitutional Convention specifically chose to go away from defining those who can vote or those who can petition from legal voters to electors. The 1988 amendment changed those eligible to sign the petition to registered voters. So we've had this conversation before in Nebraska about how we're going to describe who can participate. So the quantum of registered voters has been interpreted to mean all registered voters as of the deadline of the petition filing. So the quantum, I guess, is probably the number. In 1997, Commission recommended, so the 1997 Commission would be like a commission about the Constitution, that the one act or portion of an act language and amendment and was added in 1998. Same amendment placing single subject rule in the Section 2, Article 3 of the Constitution. So, but Senator Hunt is right about fact that I would say the word legal is superfluous in that. So that we've had this conversation, we went back, we moved away from defining legal voters to electors, and then we moved from electors to registered voters. And that's for how we define people for the petition process. We're talking about a petition process here. I've talked a little bit previously, same issue that I have that Senator Hunt just raised in changing the threshold for who can be, what is a successful referendum to more than 50%, well, changing it to 60%, as opposed to what the Constitution says, which is 50% plus one. And actually, should we look at that section and see how it defines? I think it's just a ballots cast. Let's see, what was that section? Let's see. I think it's Section 5, isn't that right? Those of you constitutional scholars out there, is this Article 3, Section 5? Nope, that's legislative. I read this the other day. But anyway, Section 4.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Oh, yeah, here we go. a measure initiated shall become law or part of the Constitution, as the case may be, when the majority of the votes cast thereon, and not less than 35% of the total vote cast in the election, should be the same, which are the same shall be submitted. So we have a registered voter requirement in the Constitution. We have a vote threshold requirement based off of the number of votes cast. We don't characterize who's voting, but of course, in any election, only registered Nebraska voters can vote in a Nebraska election. So yeah, I appreciate Senator Hunt flagging that issue for us. And it has been addressed by Constitutional Convention, State of Nebraska before, and we have settled on registered voter previously. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in opposition to the motion to recommit and have greatly appreciated the thoughtful dialogue in regards to the property tax measure, LB 243, that Senator Breezy and the Revenue Committee have put forward for us this session to take a look at. I wanted to just reiterate a couple of key components or ideas or thinking in regards to where we are with our overall fiscal health and prosperity, and just kind of note for the record some of the strategies that Nebraska has had to utilize in the past when we have faced painful recessions or economic downturns. So in my prior service as a member of the Appropriations Committee, we had to take up some very, very challenging decisions in the Great Recession. That included deep, deep cuts in the budget, and it included even special sessions to enact further deep cuts in the budget. And definitely it impacted every state agency and every program. But of course, you have to cut where you have the most ability to really make up the difference for the bottom line. So even though there's 80, 90 state agencies that are out there, many of them are smaller, many of them are cash funded. Some of those cash funds could be rated, some could not. But really the biggest items on the chopping block in a time of economic downturn are education and human services, and infrastructure to a lesser degree. So just again, knowing where we are today, when we had that challenging period, and I know when some senators in this body faced $1 billion shortfall, not that long ago, they had to make similar challenging issues, but things were so bad during that Great Recession that if we hadn't had a robust cash reserve to draw upon as a Band-Aid to kind of help us weather that storm, that rainy day fund came into handy because indeed it was raining. But we also took a variety of other pretty drastic actions that we're not going to have the ability to go back to again from that period, and then also where we are in terms of this budget. Senator Raybould talked a little bit about this during her times on the mic because of her past service as a member of the county board and the city council. But as we were scrambling to try and meet our obligations to balance the budget without increasing taxes during those really challenging times, we had deep, deep cuts to health and human services and education, which has been hard to recover from. We also stopped important property tax relief programs like aid to cities and counties, and some other programs that helped to ensure our partners on the local level could meet their critical governmental obligations, but also wouldn't have so much pressure on their need to enact higher property taxes on the local level to meet those obligations if we were providing some state support to them. So those programs went away and have never returned and won't. We also, in this very budget, in this very year, are putting a lot of pressure on the cash reserve. We're raiding a lot of cash funds, and things are rosy now. And I appreciate Senator Breezy's optimism. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to bring an optimistic lens to my life and my work. But I am concerned that when and if we have a downturn, and it's uncertain at best how deep that will be or when that will be, that it will be challenging for us to meet core obligations of government to keep our great education system strong now and for generations to come, and to ensure a strong safety net and appropriate investments in things like economic development, natural resources, and infrastructure if we're utilizing tools to balance the budget that we're not going to have in the downturn. A strong cash reserve, a shored up safety net, ensuring things like our unemployment program is sound and in place. There's a host of different strategies states can take in addition to ensuring a robust cash reserve that we really should start to look at just to ensure we are prepared for the future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I agree with Senator Conrad that we need to be looking towards the future, be conservative in our approach to spending, commitments, obligations, ensuring that we are doing what's smart for future Nebraska. I did want to continue a little bit about the conversation I was on the last time on the mic. I did read a little bit more of the book I was referencing for you all, A Reference Guide, 2nd edition, Nebraska State Constitution, which again is a great read. Everybody around here should read it. Gives you a lot of good insight into the Constitution, explains sections of it, and gives you some case law and analysis. So I was reading you part about Section 4, initiative referendum signatures required, and there's a part where this is the part that I thought was interesting. Implicit repealer. So this section, again, first sentence of Section 4 was implicitly repealed in 1988 by the 1988 amendment of Section 2 and 3. So this is Section 4, though, which the 1988 amendment changing electors to registered voters. So it's saying we changed from electors to registered voters. And if you recall, I said in 1920, we changed from legal voters to electors. So we moved away from legal voters in 1920, we moved to electors, and then we moved to registered voters. But so then there's a Supreme Court case in Dugan versus Bierman, when Bierman was the Secretary of State. The court concluded that the number of signatures needed to invoke the power of initiative had to be computed based upon the total number of registered voters rather than upon the number of votes cast in the last gubernatorial election. The standard for implicit repeal of constitutional provisions is stated in Dugan, and it says, this is quoting the court, the Nebraska Constitution may be amended by implication only where the language adopted by the voters conflicts with existing constitutional provisions. The Nebraska Constitution as amended must be read as a whole. A constitutional amendment becomes an integral part of the instrument and must be construed and harmonized, if possible, with all other provisions so as to give effect to every section and clause as well as the whole instrument. A clause in a constitutional amendment will prevail over a provision in the original instrument inconsistent with the amendment only when they relate to the same subject, are adopted for the same purpose, and cannot be enforced without substantial conflict. So what it's saying there is there was a constitutional amendment in 1988 that amended sections 2 and 3, but not section 4. Section 4 also applies or covers the second power reserved to the people, which is referendum. And the amendment didn't change the language in section 4, but if you read section 4 with the new language in section 2 and 3, there would be a conflict. And because the language existed in section 4 when the new language was adopted in section 2 and 3, section 2 and 3's new language controls because of the conflict and the implication that the voters voted for those changes, understanding the whole Constitution as it existed at the time, and that they intended to change the procedure in the manner they did in the amendment. So we've talked about, this is kind of like a rules of construction that we've talked about on a few other things, and where we've talked about how the courts, in this example, will read the entire document together, and they will read in the new language with the existing language under from the view that whoever adopted the new language, being voters of the legislature, understood and knew the existing language, adopted the new language in the context of that existing language.
1 minute.
And they adopted it with the intent that the new language would control. And the new language does control because obviously it was adopted in the context of understanding all of those things. So that applies to a lot of other places that we've talked about. We've talked about when we talked about the abortion bill, adopting new language has to be read in context with all of the remainder of the statute, that it does not explicitly repeal or exclude interpretation of. So that's the same thing that the Supreme Court did here, where they interpreted the other constitutional amendments sections to control over an existing constitutional section, which it did not explicitly touch upon, but that section had to be read together with the new language. So that's just a little lesson for you on, I guess, courts interpreting statute and constitution. And again, we use the term registered voter, not elector or legal voter. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Duncan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do appreciate that history lesson from my roommate, Senator John Kavanaugh. You can always rely on him for a touch of history and even sometimes at late night, a touch of poetry. I would hope that sometime we could get some more of that memorized poetry from him during some of these discussions. But I did want to just rise again and talk a little bit more about things that are contained in this bill. I know that a lot of times these packages are a little bit hard to dissect, and I think that a number of folks have been speaking about what's contained in LB 243. But a lot of that can get kind of lost in the weeds as we're having conversations about various particular portions. And so just to clarify a couple of other parts of this, one of the main aspects of LB 243 here is the money that the state commits to direct credits to property taxpayers is going to grow from $275 million annually to $475 million by 2028. The later increases of that are going to be linked to the annual growth of assessed evaluations. I know one of the concerns that has been raised regarding that, the direct credits to property taxpayers, is that a majority of that is going to end up hypothetically going to the 20% of Nebraska's top wage earners, so the top 20% of wage earners. And this is one of the conversations I think that we've been having as a body overall about taxes, is who benefits the most from tax reductions. I think that there's multiple reasons that oftentimes we see tax reductions benefiting maybe the more wealthy folks. Part of that is structural, right? Part of that is the way that these tax programs are created and how tax brackets work. But I think one of the other parts and one of the other reasons that tax reduction efforts tend to benefit wealthier individuals is a larger societal problem. And what I mean by that is the kind of people who have access to the means in order to even know about property tax credits, or, for example, have accountants or be able to work with accountants when they're looking at their taxes at the end of the year. The people who have means are more likely to benefit from the things that we're putting in place to actually give them reductions. A good example of this is the amount of friends I do have who have never even heard of or claimed this property tax credit that we keep talking about. Now, part of that is, I think, on some folks who don't do their research. And I know that the Revenue Committee has worked hard this year to find ways to ensure that people do know about property tax credits and how to claim them. But by and large, I think that in the legislature, we sometimes live in a bubble, and we sometimes live in this tunnel where we talk about these things so much, we anticipate or believe that A, everybody knows about them, or B, everybody can benefit from them. And so I just think it's important to highlight yet again some of the structural inequity and societal oppression that we see leads to folks in lower income brackets being unable to access, some of the help and some of the benefits that we're trying to give taxpayers here. And so I just want to make sure I highlight that point. We need to work on that as well. In addition to that, obviously, the state, back on what's in LB 243, the state would remove a cap on growth within a program that allows property owners to claim income tax credits for taxes paid to K through 12 schools and community colleges. The credits, estimated at $560 million next year, which are currently capped at a 5% annual growth, or it's a stabilizer, could expand rapidly as assessed valuations continue to grow. Ag land values across Nebraska alone grew 14% last year, as reported by the Omaha World Herald. So this is why people have talked about the need for some sort of stabilizer, cap, whatever you want to call it, on the growth of that income tax credit that you can claim.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know that Senator DeBoer, I think, had introduced an amendment at some point to talk about a 7% cap. I know there's been discussions about a 8%, 9%, 10% cap, something. And the reason I think that's so important is if this amount of tax credits continues to grow exponentially with no inhibitor on it, it could ultimately be a huge detriment to our state with regards to how much money is going to be lost through that tax credit. I think it's a great program. I think it helps taxpayers. It helps put a little bit more money back in people's pockets, but I think we have to be responsible and fiscally responsible with how we are treating that. And so that's why I believe that a cap or a lid is going to be beneficial. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Raybold, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I stand in support of LB 243 and the upcoming proposed amendment. So this morning I handed out something that Senator Linehan had passed out before that I thought was interesting. I mean, the first time that Senator Linehan had passed it out, I flagged it right away. Let me grab it. So when Senator Linehan passed it out, it's the general fund financial status. And you can see that on that page, we are throwing in all the amazing transformative things that we have been talking about for probably the last 3 days. And the problem is they're unsustainable. I know that many have talked to that point directly. But the one thing that I'm really ecstatic about, that I think is really transformative, is the fact that we are actually shifting the cost burden of public education, which is so important and so vital in our state, to the state. Right now, we all know, we've heard this talked about before, all the senators have shared their comments as they walk and knock their constituents' door, property taxes. This is a big deal. This is truly transformative. This is something I have not seen in my 12 years of public service. This is something that I am really, really excited about. But, you know, there definitely is a price tag to this. Pretty big one, $1 billion we're setting up in a fund, and then $250 million going forward. That in itself is a big challenge that we're taking on. It's also a big commitment. It's a big fiscal obligation to continue to fund it. And not, you know, I've heard some talk, well, you know, we might have to get into the Education Future Fund. Well, that's scary talk, right from the get-go. That type of conversation should have no place. If we are realistic and we're committed to making this transformational shift from our property taxes paying for public education to the state of Nebraska funding public education, that's a big deal. But the other things that we're throwing into that, and also the community college, making sure that the state of Nebraska is the funder of that, rather than, again, on our property taxes. Those are big deals. Those are big commitments, and I'd like to see that happen. But when you throw in all the other things that we're talking about, Social Security, and then, of course, the individual income tax cuts and the corporate tax cuts. These are things that cannot be sustained or funded. I really appreciate our fiscal office and their forecasting capabilities. But again, there are so many unknowns lurking out there not least of which is the huge debt ceiling. Is that going to get passed or not? I mean, that could have cataclysmic consequences, not only for our entire United States, but the state of Nebraska as well. So these are things that I wanted to share with you. And on the back side, you have page 21 from our Green Martian finance booklet that was provided to us. And it's common to have downturns, but this came right
One
from—
minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. This came right from the forecast office. And yes, it is common, customary, normal to have those dips, but this is a big dip. And that indicates that, we are probably committing to things that we should not be committing to. Certainly the Perkins Canal, do we need to fully fund it to that level? No, we could save $174 million in that endeavor. Do we need to build a new jail? No. No. If we even gave $100 million out of the $340 million projected for that cost of a new jail, say we gave just $100 million towards some of the criminal justice reforms that have been listed in the report, that would be transformative, and we wouldn't need to build a brand new jail costing the taxpayers all that money. I think we need to be smarter. I think we need to do smart fiscal policies, and that's why I think we need to be more
That's your
reflective.
time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak, and this is your final time on the recommit.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thought you were going to introduce these kids before you got to me. So I don't know what school you're all from, but welcome. You'll get announced in a minute. We are sitting here, I'm reading my Constitution, but then I pulled out my idioms book, and I thought this one was appropriate. In the offing, likely to happen soon, imminent. So I know cloture is in the offing, or likely to happen soon and imminent. In the offing is a nautical expression, which I'm sure Senator Holcroft would be able to tell us more about. There's a few other nautical expressions in here because, as we all know, today is a good Navy Day. Or is it a great Navy Day? Great Navy Day. Today's a great Navy Day, which is another expression that I appreciate. In the offing is a nautical expression originating in the early 1600s that came into widespread usage by the late 1700s. The offing is that part of the sea that is visible from or off the shore, the area between the shore and the horizon. In other words, a ship that was in the offing was within sight. A lookout who was watching for a ship to arrive would see it approaching when it was in the offing and would know that it would be docking fairly shortly. So that's a good one. I didn't know that one. Just learned it. But in terms of what we've been talking about, I've been talking about my biggest issue with this bill has been the caps, the soft caps, as Senator Breezy calls them, but the caps nonetheless, the inserting ourselves into local control, and the concern about changing the threshold for voting. And Senator Hunt started the conversation, and I've continued on about changing not just the number of votes required, but the threshold for the threshold, but also just the definitions of who is voting. And I read an excerpt from Dugan versus Bierman. It's Duggan, not to be confused with Dungan. And I read that section, and then I kind of talked a little bit. But so here's a little further explainer from the book. To the court, the first two elements were satisfied because both Section 2 and 4 dealt with the initiative petition. So this is saying the consistency of those sections, or how they applied to the same thing. So saying that the constitutional part, implicitly repeals Section 4 because Section 2 and 4 both deal with initiative petition and the number of signatures sufficient for a measure to reach the ballot. However, because the term registered voter from Section 2 could not be read to require further definition in terms of those who had voted in the last gubernatorial election, unlike the pre-amendment term electors, the terms of Section 4 substantially conflicted with the registered voter language of Section 2. The amendment, therefore, implicitly repealed Section 4's first sentence. So that is a little bit more on that. So I think that's enough history for the moment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. No one else in the queue. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to close on your motion to recommit.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would withdraw my motion and any pending motions or amendments.
They are withdrawn. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, in that case, the next amendment, first of all, Senator, there are E&R amendments. Senator Ballard for motion.
Senator Ballard for a motion.
Mr. President, I move LB 240. Mr. President, I move the E&R amendments to LB 243 be adopted.
Senators, you've heard the motion. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, nay. It is adopted.
Mr. President, Senator Breezy would move to amend with AM 1743.
Senator Breezy, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. We have LB 243 up there. And if you recall what LB 243 does, it increases the statutory minimum in the property tax credit fund, puts in an escalator. It's direct property tax relief to everyday Nebraskans. It removes the 5% cap on the allowable growth rate of the 1107 credit. And it helps to keep our property taxpayers whole by doing so. Puts in place a revenue cap on schools to protect our taxpayers. There are several exceptions there to ensure that the concerns of the education community have been accommodated. Removes the taxing authority of community colleges, replaces that revenue with state revenue. Increases the interest rate on property tax refunds, and it provides some needed changes to the Turk Commission. And so what does AM 1743 do? It's a very important amendment here. I indicated earlier that it's important, critical, arguably critical to what we're doing here, and I appreciate the opportunity to get this up. AM 1743, at the suggestion of Bryce Wilson with the Department of Education, the amendment expands the definition of non-property tax revenue in the cap portion of the bill to include, quote, all revenue from activity funds, cooperative funds, depreciation funds, employee benefit funds, nutrition funds, and so on. Mr. Wilson suggested that that language is very important to ensure that the cap operates in the proper manner. Also, at his suggestion, it also excludes the previous year's investment income from special building funds in calculating the prior year's revenue. The current language in LB 243 or the ER amendment provides that for any category of non-property tax revenue for which there's insufficient data by August 1st, it will be deemed to be equal to the prior year's amount. At the suggestion of Bryce Wilson at NDE, AM 1743 changes this date to June 1st, just giving everyone a little more time. And again, at his suggestion, the amendment also changes the date by which school districts should submit documents to assist the department in calculating the district's property tax request authority to September 30th instead of September 20th. AM 1743 further moves ahead by 1 year the implementation of the property tax credit fund increase. That initially was an oversight on my part. This tweak makes it consistent with what the governor initially proposed in his budget. AM 1743 further pushes back by 1 year the increase in the community college credit percentage to 100%. And that again was an oversight on our part. Again, that helps it line up with what we're trying to do here. Finally, the amendment tweaks the language relative to our fast-growing districts and increases the factor for student enrollment growth. And that's going back to the cap language. And this really is an effort to ensure that our fastest growing urban districts, for example, Bennington, Elkhorn, Gretna, are not handicapped by the cap proposal here. Currently, the 3% cap is increased by 15% of the percentage increase in poverty or LEP students, and 40% times the percentage increase in enrollment. And currently, for schools growing at an average rate of over 3% per year, it allows the cap to be exceeded by 70% times the percentage enrollment increase. to accommodate the concerns of these extremely fast-growing districts, the ones I just mentioned in particular, we increased the 0.7 factor to a factor of 1.0. And that is only for those schools averaging an enrollment increase of 3% per year and a student growth increase of 150 students per year. And finally, the amendment adjusts the amount of property tax relief for everyday Nebraskans. Note the understanding always has been that the amount of property tax relief and the amount of income tax relief was supposed to be about equal. We wanted to have some parity between the two programs. And so to accomplish this, we did have to reduce the income tax relief, and Senator Linehan will describe that when we get to the amendment on LB 754, how we had to pare some things back there. And with AM 1743 here, we are going to reduce by a small percent the overall property tax relief through the property tax credit fund. But note that we also will have some additional relief in year 7 to help compensate for that. So at the end of the day, we spent a lot of time on this, and hats off to my LA Edward Boone. He did a lot of work on this, and we had several iterations of this amendment, really in an effort to accommodate relative to Senator Erdman's provision in LB 243. We did also pull out the one provision that some folks suggested was constitutionally suspect. So I think we accomplished everything we needed to with AM 1743. I would urge your green vote on that amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Aguilar had guests up in the north balcony, fourth graders from West Lawn Elementary in Grand Island, and they're gone. And Senator Hughes has some guests in the south balcony, fourth graders from Cross Country School in Stromsburg, Nebraska. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, Senator Breeze, I have FA 28, FA 18, MO 1040, MO 176, and MO 1042 with notes you wish to withdraw. In that case, Mr. President, nothing further.
Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on the desk.
I do, Mr. President. Senator Breeze would move to invoke cloture on LB 243 pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
Senator Breezy, for what purpose do you rise?
I would like a call of the House, and let's do a roll call vote, regular order, please.
There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
33 ayes, 3 nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Bostar and Reapy, could you please return to the chamber and record your presence? The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. Members, the first vote is the motion to invoke cloture. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Roll call vote requested. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, voting yes. Senator Albright. Senator Arch. Voting yes. Senator Armendariz. Voting yes. Senator Ballard. Voting yes. Senator Blood. Voting yes. Senator Boston. Voting yes. Senator Bostar. Voting yes. Senator Bostelman. Voting yes. Senator Brandt. Voting yes. Senator Brewer. Voting yes. Senator Breezy. Voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh. Not voting. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Not voting. Senator Clements. Voting yes. Senator Conrad. Voting yes. Senator Day. Voting yes. Senator DeBoer. Voting yes. Senator Decay. Voting yes. Senator Dorn. Voting yes. Senator Dover. Voting yes. Senator Dungan. Voting yes. Senator Erdman. Voting yes. Senator Frederickson. Voting yes. Senator Holleran. Voting yes. Senator Hansen. Voting yes. Senator Hardin. Voting yes. Senator Holcroft. Voting yes. Senator Hughes. Voting yes. Senator Hunt. Voting no. Senator Ibach. Voting yes. Senator Jacobson. Voting yes. Senator Kauth. Voting yes. Senator Linehan. Voting yes. Senator Lippincott. Voting yes. Senator Lowe. Voting yes. Senator McDonald. Voting yes. Senator McKinney. Not voting. Senator Mosier. Voting yes. Senator Merman. Voting yes. Senator Raybold. Voting yes. Senator Reapy. Voting yes. Senator Sanders. Voting yes. Senator Slama. Voting yes. Senator Vargas. Voting yes. Senator Von Gillern. Voting yes. Senator Walls. Voting yes. Senator Wayne. Voting yes. Senator Wishart. Voting yes. Vote is 44 ayes, 1 nay, Mr. President, on the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture is invoked. The first vote is on the adoption of AM 1743. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
45 ayes, no nays on adoption of the amendment.
The amendment is adopted.
Senator Ballard for a motion.
Senator Ballard for a motion.
Mr. President, I move that LB 243 be advanced to E&R for engrossing.
There's been a request for a machine vote. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay to the advancement of LB 243 to E&R for engrossment. Mr. Clerk.
41 ayes, no nays on advancement of the bill, Mr. President.
It is advanced. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, your Committee on Enrollment Review reports Legislative Bill 813 is correctly engrossed and placed on final reading. Motions to be printed from Senator Linehan to LB 727. New LR, Senator Erdman, LR 144. That will be referred to the Executive Board. Amendment to be printed, Senator Breezy to LB 243. Senator Conrad, new LR 145 and 146. Those will both be referred to the Executive Board. New LR for Senator Merman, LR 147 and 148. Those will both, and 149. Those will all three be referred to the Executive Board. New A bill, Legislative Bill 705A, introduced by Senator Merman. It's a bill for enacting new appropriations, appropriates funds to aid in the carrying out of the provisions of Legislative Bill 705 and declares an emergency. Mr. President, next item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 754.
Yes, do you want to do that first?
First of all, Senator, I have ENR amendments.
Senator Ballard, you're recognized for a motion.
Mr. President, I move the ENR amendments to LB 754 be adopted.
It is a debatable motion. Senator Abel, you're in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do support ER 19 for enrollment and review. And then I wanted to make some additional comments going forward on LB 754. I think you've heard me talk about my handout, so I'm not going to go back to that. I think what we're facing here is LB 754, which is a corporate and income tax that is truly unsustainable. I think in light of all the transformative things that we're trying to do with property taxes and public education, what I would have rather have seen on LB 754 is an increase in the child care tax credits. You know, we're talking about a workforce shortage. This is something the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce has spoken about for quite some time, in addition to affordable housing. But their third item that they have talked about is child care. We know that this is such a burden to our young families in our state of Nebraska. And so one of the things that I have talked about, if we really wanted to be transformative, instead of the individual income tax credits, an accelerated version of the income tax credits and the corporate tax cuts, corporate tax cuts and individual tax cuts, we really should be focusing on child care tax credits. Why? Why would we want to redirect our attention to that? Currently in LB 754, they only have $30 million. $30 million. Now that sounds like a large number, but we know that the need for childcare and the affordability and accessibility to childcare is so essential. Why? Why is that essential? Because we want both parents who right now have to work outside the home in order to meet their other financial obligations, but we want them to get some real relief. We know from analysis that when you help middle-class families, our young families, they're more likely to pour that money right back into our economy. You've heard me talk about the economic multiplier effect. We have seen that from past corporate tax cuts. Moody's Analytic talked about the $1.7 trillion corporate tax cut. It only generated 32 cents out of every dollar spent. But when we gave SNAP benefits, supplemental nutrition assistance program, or food stamps out during the pandemic, we know that that multiplier effect was $1.70. When we provided the unemployment assistance during the pandemic, that had a multiplier effect per out of $1, it was even more. It was $1.40. We know that these type of programming and assistance with rental assistance, those help our economy while we're still doing great things in supporting our families. So these are the things that are important that we should stay focused on. In LB 754, we do an accelerated version of the corporate and income tax cuts. That's the wrong place for our focus. My fellow Nebraskans out there watching that, you know that if you have 2 kids, the cost of—
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. The cost of childcare is extraordinarily high. And so you're making really difficult decisions on how are you going to be able to afford your rent? How are you going to be able to buy food? And if you have a mortgage, that's an added stressor onto it. And making sure that everybody stays well, your children stay well, and that you stay well so that you can be gainfully employed and go to work each and every day. So for all these reasons, I have concerns about LB 754, and I heard rumblings that there might be a further reduction in the child care tax credit, and that is truly alarming. That's That's not the right direction we need to go as a state to be able to help our Nebraska families. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybold. Senator Conrad has some guests in the north balcony, the 45 ninth graders from North Star High School in Lincoln. Please stand and be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, a series of withdrawals from Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, MO 139, 138, 137, 134, 135, 136, and AMs 1720, 1721, and AM 111.
Those are withdrawn.
Mr. President, additional withdrawals from Senator Bostar and Senator Linehan, both with notes to withdraw. In that case, Mr. President, next amendment, Senator Linehan would move to amend with AM 1760.
Senator Linehan, you're recognized to open.
Okay, so as I said, when we were on this on general funding, when all the numbers get added up, we're going to have to pull some money back on tax cuts. So what will remain in the bill after this amendment is we keep moving the top rate to 399 by 2027. So it will go from where it is now to 399. We're keeping, because it doesn't cost very much, Senator Blood, so we're keeping the deduction for income earned by federal retirees from federal retirement pensions. So that's for the people who were never on Social Security. They had to be working for the federal government. I think the decision was made in 82. They could go to the new system or stay on the old system. So it's not a lot of people. I even question whether the fiscal note is, I think it's probably too high, but that's good planning. So keep that part. We keep the child tax credit part. We may have to go back and do, Senator Bostar, could you yield for a question? I'm sorry, I didn't give you a heads up.
Senator Bostar, would you yield to some questions?
Yes. We may have to do some adjustments to this, but right now it's good. Can you tell what adjustments we're doing in this amendment?
Yes, so in the amendment regarding the child care tax credit provisions, the text of the provisions is the same, but we are changing the allocation of total funds. We had $35 million for all the provisions collectively. That's going down to $25 million. We are keeping the $15 million for the direct child care tax credits to families. We are reducing the tax credits that were going to the incentivization of the development of child care facilities from 10 million to 2.5 million. And then employees of child care facilities, child educators, that is going from 10 million to 7.5 million.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. The other changes we're making, we're losing salt. So we're not going to, it costs too much. We don't have the money for it this year. So that means that's the $10,000 maximum deduction you can take regardless of how much you paid in property taxes and income taxes. That goes away. We're also taking out the allowable income tax deductions for costs of certain property and certain research, which was LB 492. And also, I've talked to the administration. They're going to work with the Department of Revenue on the taxation of people who are just here for a conference or here for training for less than 2 weeks. I think that can be figured out regulatory. I don't think we actually have to do a bill, but if we do, we can come back and do that next year. So with that, what we're basically doing here is taking the bill back to what the governor proposed, plus the child tax credits, plus Blood's federal retirees. So I would appreciate your green vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Kauth, you're recognized to speak. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to speak.
I'll waive my time.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I want to thank Senator Linehan for her leadership in regards to these issues and thank the Revenue Committee as well for their hard work in putting forward this package of ideas and making appropriate adjustments from general to select file to ensure that it's better designed in terms of our present fiscal situation and taking into account some measures that might be unaffordable in the short term. I definitely retain significant concerns about the overall equity and sustainability, particularly with the tax cuts for the wealthiest Nebraskans and corporate citizens that make up the vast majority of this measure. That being said, I am very grateful to see the components in regards to quickening the Social Security exemptions and relief. I am very grateful to see the first of its kind child tax credit be adopted in Nebraska. This was an issue that I brought forward this year, and that was my priority bill. So it's definitely not the same in terms of overall scope and design and extent, but I do appreciate that Senator Bostar had a similar idea, and a portion of that has been adopted or has been added into LB 754. So just to put a couple of things in context, and then I wanted to flag an E&R amendment that I filed this morning as well. If you look at the child tax credit that I introduced earlier this year and prioritized this year for a fraction of the price tag on this overall bill, we could provide a tax credit to over 81% of Nebraska families and kids that would provide $1,000 on a sliding scale based on their income to help families meet their bottom line and to figure out what the best path might be for their families. So families could utilize that tax credit for school tuition. They could utilize that for childcare. They could utilize that for a host of different family expenses that come before them. So the program was designed based upon our experiences and learning from COVID relief, where we were providing direct support to many families to help address economic concerns during the pandemic. And it was a widely popular program with wide bipartisan support. We have seen child tax credits based on the federal model and program start to be adopted in our sister states, including ones have a very similar political geography to ours: deep red states, blue states, purple, and in between. So I do appreciate that there is a very, very modest first step in regards to this measure to adopt a child care and a child tax credit. But I think when you look at the overall price tag, we could have done a significant amount to do more for families to help them meet the rising costs of childcare by putting that $1,000 per child tax credit out there. These have these programs have very wide support across Democrats, independents, and Republicans. And I really do hope that we'll continue to see some work on that measure. Thank you, Mr. President, into the future. The other issue I want to flag for folks is an E&R amendment that I filed that would slightly modify the program design of the child tax credit without impacting the bottom line by 1 penny. It would move the component that would provide additional corporate tax credits directly to people. And I think that's the least we can do, considering there's a 399 significant corporate tax cut inherent in the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Slama, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Linehan.
Senator Wayne, 4 minutes 50. I'm sorry, Senator Linehan, 4 minutes 50.
Unless Senator Wayne wants it. He is dressed up today. There he is. So I'm getting very legitimate questions, and I'm sorry if I'm short. If you look at the fiscal note, page 3, so you've got computers or staff, I have staff over here that can help. The fiscal note, it lays out clearly what each part cost. So, and Chairman Appropriations, of course, is very interested in that. So the itemized deduction in the first year, because I won't go why, itemized deduction in the first year, so 23-24 would have cost $40 million, so that goes away. The business and asset research expenditures cost $29 million, goes away. Non-resident costs $11 million, goes away. And then in this 24-25, itemized cost $17.3 million, goes away. $45 million on business research and expenditures, goes away. $27 million non-resident. Now I have to tell you, I never bought. I think there's something very wrong with the non-resident number anyway, but we can work on that again through the administration. Then you take $10 million out of the 24-25 on the child tax credits. So that is an explanation if you want the numbers. They're on page 3 of the fiscal note, and it's the bottom 3 that we're taking out, and the top one we take out $10 million. So it's a lot of money. Now I'm going to talk about the whole kind of big picture here. I realize, because I have children, and I have children, I have children, and they have children, so I have grandchildren, and 3 of them are in daycare, 4 of them are in elementary school. I'm forgetting one. Oh no, 5 are in elementary school, kindergartner. So I understand how tough it is. The kindergartner and 3-year-old have a baby, so there's diapers to buy and daycare to pay for. I understand that. So I maybe we can do more, but I also understand, and I know that $1,000 per kid or $1,500 or $500 per kid that got sent out for the federal government was wildly popular. It was wildly popular, but it was not at all targeted. It went to people that didn't need it. You couldn't buy a lawnmower, a riding lawnmower. You couldn't buy an above ground swimming pool. It was good. We didn't have a deep recession, but there was some craziness to it, and now we have high inflation. So I wouldn't use that as a model for how we want to go forward in Nebraska. This tax cut takes the top rate down to 399. That is not just for the rich, folks. It's for very middle class Nebraskans with children who are trying to figure out how they're going to save for college, pay for the house they're living in, which we're also taking down property taxes on. This plan by the governor is huge, and it will touch every Nebraskan. We can sit here all day and say that it's only for the rich. That's just not true. And do the people who pay more taxes in dollars, do they get a bigger cut in dollars? Right. Because if you pay more, you get
1 minute.
It's a percentage thing. And I know we can talk about, we didn't adjust the lower rates. We adjusted the lower rates in 2012. The only rate we didn't adjust in 2012 was the highest rate. When we started this process 3 years ago or 4 years ago, our highest rate for individuals is 6.84, folks. That is ridiculous. You have 2 teachers, we're paying 6.84. A nurse married to a policeman would have been in the top bracket. It's important we do this. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Breezy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. First, I want to thank Chairman Linehan and members of the Revenue Committee for their work. Tireless efforts on the part of this package is being put together, especially Senator Linehan for her leadership on this, and property taxes, income taxes, and also Senator Sanders, her work on education funding, along with Chairman Merman and members of the Education Committee. We really have a package here that's going to be transformative in nature in delivering to everyday Nebraskans the tax relief that they truly deserve. It's going to help our economy, going to help stimulate our economy. It's going to be good for Nebraska. And as for the individual rate that we're discussing here, as of January 3rd, our marginal rate was higher than all of our neighbors, and it begins at a ridiculously low level. So what does this proposal do for us? It puts more dollars back in the hands of everyday Nebraskans. And the vast majority of who we're talking about here are everyday middle-class Nebraskans. And giving these dollars back is good for Nebraskans, it's good for families. LB 754 improves our rankings on individual income taxes. And that's important in our efforts to attract businesses, employees, workers to our state. LB 754 can also stimulate economic activity in our state. In a 2018 Department of Revenue study, they looked at the impact of a $100 million income tax cut. In the executive summary, the Department of Revenue concluded that such a cut would increase disposable income by $111 million, would create over 1,000 new jobs, and would generate $27 million in new investment. And because of that stimulation in economic activity, it would generate an additional $5 million in state investment. I'm going to talk briefly here about Senator Bostar's provisions of this bill, the early childhood contribution provisions in particular. And within those provisions are incentives to invest in early childhood facilities. And why are those incentives necessary? We talk all the time about growing our state, creating opportunities for folks to live and work and raise their families in Nebraska. And growing our state should always drive policy in this body. You know, and how do we grow our state? How do we stimulate economic activity, population growth, and employment? There's a lot of things we can look at. We can look at taxes, we can look at schools, we can look at infrastructure, we can look at recreation, broadband. But I would submit to you that high quality early childhood programs are critical to workforce development and to the future growth of our state. And as we try to attract a skilled workforce to our communities, the presence of quality early childhood is crucial. Young parents, the way they want to locate where their children have access to early childhood. If your community doesn't have early childhood programs, early child care programs available, families are going to look elsewhere. And businesses looking to locate in our state, expand in our state, also understand the importance of early child care to their company's success. They realize it'll be easier to attract employees if child care is available. And businesses also believe that the foundation established in a quality early child care environment enables a young person to enter the workforce with a wider array of marketable skills. And so I would submit that access to child care, early childhood, is critical in growing our state and our efforts to expand our economy. And I want to thank Senator Bostar for bringing these provisions in LB 754. Thank you, Mr. President. And I will wholeheartedly support AM 1760 and LB 754. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Von Gillern, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of LB 754. in AM 1760. I just want to share or repeat some of the comments that have already been shared, particularly by Senator Linehan, about the emphasis and the hard work that went in on modifying the current tax situation in Nebraska. We talked a lot in the last 2 days about property taxes and how important that is to all Nebraskans. But actually, property taxes only affect those that own property by definition. Income taxes affects everyone in the state of Nebraska. There was a very concerted effort to make sure that the income tax cuts impacted all Nebraskans, and they benefited from that. And I believe that this is a plan that gets us to that point. I did go back and check I was looking at the tax rates. In fact, I was a little surprised. I looked up to see I was next on the mic. I was doing a little bit of additional homework before I got up just to look at what the actual breaks on the brackets were. And these tax cuts go down to the point where a individual filer is making $28,000. So when you add that in concert with the child care tax credits, which are specifically focused towards families and individuals typically of lower income, I believe that we are impacting just about every Nebraskan with these tax cuts. I've stated on the mic numerous times in the past, and there's been plenty of data and information shared back and forth to talk about why people move to a state and why people move away from other states. And I've shared some information on that. I've got some that I'll share on the floor here possibly next time if I have another opportunity to speak. But people do vote with their feet. And quite often when they vote with their feet, they're taking the tax situation in mind. There's been a study that was done that I've got on my pile of paper here on my desk that was done around the companies that handle cross-country moves. And it illustrates very clearly that people are moving from states that have high tax burdens to states that have low tax burdens. In particular, we're seeing quite an exodus out of states like California and quite an influx in states such as Florida. Unfortunately, we've seen some Nebraskans that have moved from our home state to Florida and to other states Florida and Texas and other states that have no income tax. So we know this is a very real thing. In fact, there was a legislator, my predecessor in District 4, moved to Florida last year, and I know for quality of life issues, I'm sure, but the tax burden, tax situation was certainly a factor in that conversation. So we know that it's real. We want to do everything that we can. We talk in this body and on both sides of the aisle. It's often spoken that we want to retain families in Nebraska. We want to retain people here to live and grow and build their families here, build their businesses here. And one of the ways that we can do that is to create a tax environment that's conducive to that. A small piece of this does impact corporate tax rates, and obviously doing homework on that. I was a little bit surprised when I joined the Revenue Committee and got to looking at the numbers that corporate tax really only represents, I believe, 7% of the total tax income to the state. So while corporate tax cuts are a popular thing to banty about and to badmouth and to pick on, it really does not represent a large part of our revenue. It's certainly 6 to 7% is significant, but it's not the most significant part of our revenue.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Personal income taxes represent about 5 times that amount. So it's significant what we're trying to do here, and I think it'll be impacting for families in Nebraska. I think it's impacting for all families from all bases, from just about every income level. And I'm pleased to be a part of supporting the LB 754 and AM 1760. And when it comes up for vote, I encourage your green vote on those. Thank you.
Senator Raybold, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to continue to delve into some of the economic news, and it should be a reality check for all of us in this chamber. We know that our forecasts are less optimistic because it continues with uncertainty with our national economy, certainly with inflation. increase in interest rates, even when we're increasing the interest rates, it has not slowed down the rate of inflation, because we know that job growth is strong, which is a good indicator, but it's not slowing down the inflation rate as much as we would like it to be. We know last year the inflation rate was 6.5%, and as of the results that came out yesterday, it's now at 4.9%. That is somewhat good news. You heard me say before that Nebraska is failing in 4 economic indicators compared to the rest of the Midwest, as well as the United States. And this is one where you would think that some of the tax credits that were triggered from LB 873 for both corporate and individual, you would see an increase, but it says business formation within the last 4 quarters were down 3.6%, whereas in the Midwest, they're actually up 1.2%. These are from the U.S. Census business formation statistics by state that are updated in real time. One interesting economic news is, as of yesterday, our job openings in our state are 48,000. We were at one point had 80,000 job openings. I guess that is one glimmer of hope. But the truth is we are not performing as well as we should be. How do we know that? Because of some of the economic indicators I've shared with you. But you know what we did yesterday? We had $715 million left to spend that would go towards some of the innovative programs that we're looking at. But yesterday, what we had to do is we had to take $170 million from the cash reserve to pump it up even more. That is so ironic. Here we are so flush with cash, yet we have to take from the cash reserve already. That should give everyone a little bit of a pause, because we thought $715 million is a large sum of money, but it's still not enough to pay for the income tax cuts proposed in LB 754, nor the property tax cuts proposed in LB 243. Here's another reason why Nebraska's economy is performing worse relative to other states, which has prompted an increase in the federal Medicaid funds, which the legislature is leveraging for other purposes. So what they found out when a state has lower growth rates and also a lower ratio of personal income has gone down, the federal government triggers additional Medicaid funding. So we hope those numbers can be turned around, but they're already baked into this budget, showing that we're committed to paying this, but next year, that ratio will increase, hopefully, which means that means we have to contribute our matching funds. Where are we going to get the money from to do something like that? And I know Senator Linehan doesn't like when I talk about this piece from former Senators Kurt Friesen and former Senator Paul Schumacher. For full disclosure, Senator Paul Schumacher is my cousin. He's way smarter than I will ever be. And he is way better at budgets than I will ever be. But this is what they said, and I think it deserves a point of taking time to read it. While we were cutting programs and services, we've been cutting, thank you, Mr. President, we've been cutting taxes, income tax and personal taxes since 2020, but we were cutting programs and services. We were also cutting taxes from 2011 through 2021. We reduced state revenues to the tune of $1 billion a year by the end of the decade. And that doesn't include 2022, when the legislature lowered personal and corporate income tax rates, phased in a full exemption for Social Security income, and expanded a refundable income tax on property taxes paid. The legislature is now poised to do in a single year what took us a decade: cut taxes by more than $1 billion. If they follow through with also providing dollar for dollar property tax relief, the state will end up foregoing another $2 billion a year by 2029. The entire general fund budget is just over $5 billion. So how can this level of revenue loss be sustainable?
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Duncan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I do rise in favor of AM 1760, and I still have some concerns about LB 754, but I do want to urge my colleagues for their green vote on AM 1760 here. I do think that it's a measured approach to sort of finding ways to reduce the overall cost of what we're talking about with LB 754. I'm unsure if I think this brings it back down to a level where all of this is still affordable. I still have some concerns that I'll get to in a second, but I do want to take a minute to thank Senator Linehan and the other members of the Revenue Committee for working on this to try to find a way to get this path forward. I know we talked a lot about Senator Breezy working with folks and getting them to the table, and Senator Linehan absolutely has done the same thing with regards to 754 and talking to stakeholders and trying to find ways to make this package ultimately one that can, I think, benefit Nebraska as a whole. As I stated on general file, we all agree that taxes are not fun to pay. We all agree that taxes likely feel too high for everybody. And I think that what we should be focusing on, and I think what the effort of all of us here should be, is finding ways to help everyday Nebraskans get money back into their pockets. And when I'm knocking doors and talking to constituents in LD 26, what I know is people just want to make things a little bit easier. People are looking to make their life just a little bit easier with regard to a little bit of money back in their pocket. And that's what I think we can all work together on here. My concern, however, about LB 754 remains the long-term sustainability of the reduction of the top two brackets down to 3.99%. And part of my concern about that is that every year since 2020, this legislature has reduced taxes. And every year there's been conversations about what the long-term forecast of that's going to be. And I understand that we've enjoyed, I think, for a period of time, some unprecedented economic growth. And I think we've seen some money in our pockets here in Nebraska that we weren't expecting as a state. But when we look at the long-term sustainability of what we're talking about here, I do have some pretty grave concerns. As we discussed yesterday, the cash reserve is systemically going to be reducing. And what we look at on the green sheet is we do see some nominal or some moderate growth of the general fund between the next couple of bienniums into the out years. But what I want to make very, very clear to my colleagues is that that green sheet and the general fund growth that we're seeing there is predicated or based on an analysis of current law. So the effects of the tax reduction that were previously passed, which by 2027 reduces the top income bracket down to 5.84%, with that data, it looks as though we are currently sustainable. So what my suggestion was, I believe on general file, when we were talking about the reduction to either 4.99 or 5.84, was to allow the tax cuts that have previously been approved to go into effect, which is still a tax cut and a significant tax cut, but allow it to go into effect immediately. And then we have that reduction down to the 5.84 for the top bracket, and then take a pause. And take a pause to look and see what the long-term effect is of that reduction. If things are continuing to be good and we continue to see growth and we actually do see people coming to Nebraska for reduced taxes and we do see corporations taking advantage of a reduced corporate tax rate, then I think we can continue that conversation. But my fear is that the reduction of the top bracket down to 3.99, as well as the corporate tax down to 3.99, is going to ultimately put us in a position where our revenues are going to be so reduced that we're going to find ourselves in a situation 6, 7, 8 years down the line where we're going to be saying to ourselves, do we need to cut services? Do we need to raise taxes? And that's a no-win situation that I don't think any of us want to find ourselves in. And so that's a concern that I do have. And when you specifically look at the way that this thank you, Mr. President, tax package is designed, I do understand Senator Linehan and others talking about how this does benefit everybody, given that everybody has some reduction if they make over a certain point, but the proportional effect of this tax reduction does tend to benefit top income earners. Under LB 754, what we know is that 3/4 of the tax savings are expected to flow to the top 20% of income earners in Nebraska. And that's folks who have an annual income greater than $138,000. A family with an annual income of $70,000 could expect to see a $370 tax cut, while the family in the top 20% who makes $365,000 a year would expect to see a savings of about $6,000. I understand the notion that if you pay more taxes, you're going to see a larger number decrease with regard to the cash that you're actually saving, but as a proportional outcome, I do think that this does have
Senator.
some. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Linehan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Jacobson. Our forecasts are not less optimistic. They just moved the money forward a little bit in the forecast. What did happen in the forecast, and Senator Clemens, would you help me with this? Just, would you yield to a question?
Senator Clements, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
I'm not questioning so much as I'm going to say something and then tell me if I'm wrong. What happened to the forecasting board is they took 80 million out of 22, 23.
Yes.
And then they put 50 million into 23, 24.
No, they added 25 million to fiscal year 24 and added another 55 million in 25.
So as far as revenues going forward, it moved years, but the revenue's all still there according to the forecasting board.
Yes, they increased the revenue forecast for the next 2 fiscal years.
Thank you, Senator Clements. So there's no downturn in revenue from the forecasting board. And inflation is coming down. It's a big drop from 6.5 to 4.9. So, and the other thing about inflation, and I want it to come down, but inflation actually increases revenues, guys. People have inflation and they get increases in their wages and things cost more, revenues go up, not down. Which makes our 3% revenue growth kind of silly because our historical revenue growth is, I think, 5.5. So our projections are based on 3. So I would be a lot better off if I did my life as a fiscal office does the state budget. Because I've always been kind of like, it'll be okay. I mean, I'll survive. I won't die broke, hopefully, maybe. But I don't know of anybody that is as conservative as our fiscal office has been. But again, our historical growth, Senator Breezy, would you yield for a question? Because I don't want to make a mistake here.
Senator Breezy, will you yield?
Yes.
Isn't our historical growth over 5% now?
Yeah, I think it's 5.4% for the last 40 years.
5.4% for the last 40 years. And when we look at our the fiscal office and revenue committee and the appropriations committee met, and we agreed to use what for the out years?
Well, on the unadjusted numbers, we use 3%.
So didn't we both agree that that was very, very fiscally conservative?
Yes, very much so.
Right. So the whole idea that this isn't sustainable is just wrong. Thank you, Senator Breezy. It's just wrong. It's sustainable. And again, we have lots of money in the rainy day fund, and we have set aside the billion plus 250 million plus 250 million plus 250 million for the Education Future Fund. We have no business holding on to money and keeping our tax rates where they are when we are floating in money and Nebraskans are facing inflation. They are facing high property taxes. We have high property taxes on the middle income. Guys, we have no business having more money than we need. That's not what we're here for. We're here to have enough money to take care of the things we need to take care of, and we do, with plenty in a reserve in case there's a downturn. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I wanted to share just a little bit more information about my thinking in regards to slight adjustments to the child care component of this measure that is before us, and that will be subject to a vote, hopefully, on the E&R amendment that I filed. So just as a refresher, I think everybody knows this from their lived experiences and feedback from their constituents, but childcare is one of the key issues that many families face in Nebraska. And in fact, Nebraska has been ranked the 9th highest, most expensive state in terms of child care for two-parent families, and the 4th highest state in terms of expense for child care for single parents. We know that there are unique considerations in terms of accessing high-quality child care that perhaps are different in greater Nebraska than in our metro areas as well. And I think one thing that's really important to remember is, well, two things that I think are really important to remember in regards to the program design for the child care tax credit proposal component, is that in greater Nebraska, in many instances, there's perhaps a higher reliance on in-home care. So by diverting additional tax credits to corporations to stand up child care programs, it really actually inhibits the ability of many working families or farm families in greater and rural Nebraska from being able to benefit from that child care benefit. So by a slight adjustment in diverting that $2.5 million tax credit to corporations for child care access and opportunities, you could help maybe about, I think I'm trying to get updated numbers on it, about 4,000 more kids or families utilize that money with that $2.5 million to access in-home child care, which many of them already rely upon. And I just wanted to reiterate, and hopefully this will be a broader focus for our session together next year, but we're going to need to continue a North Star approach to addressing our workforce challenges. And one of the key solutions to doing that is childcare. And I want to give shout outs and credit where credit is due to leaders in the Nebraska business community, the chambers of commerce who have come forward, who have identified childcare as a key priority and who have been working in support of measures like this, like mine, like Senator DeBoer's child care subsidy program. I also want to acknowledge and commend groups like the Farm Bureau for elevating the need to ensure that we have access to high quality childcare for their members and to benefit our ag economy as well. So again, we perhaps might have slightly different approaches for how we address those issues to ensure high quality access to childcare and to help alleviate the pressure on families' bottom lines. But there is a consensus point in terms of the need to do more. And I think that this is a very exciting first start. I think that we can and we should tweak it today on select file without one additional penny on the bottom line, just to put $2.5 million in addition to what is already carved out for childcare workers and for families back in the pockets of families that are struggling to pay with these costs instead of corporations. The last piece that I will add in that regard is there are small business programs available. Thank you, Mr. President. And if you look at some of the research and recent reporting on this, there are existing programs in place that are helping child care centers open in rural Nebraska. So there's really no need for a redundancy in terms of the corporate tax credit component of this. And those dollars should dollars should be directed to families in need. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Erdman, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon. We've been talking about how to lower our tax rates so we can be competitive. So I asked Senator Wayne a question. I asked him if zero was a number. And he said it was. So I asked him if he thought zero was lower than 3.99. He said it was. So what we're doing in the legislature is what we've done for 50 some years, is we're trying to put a Band-Aid on an amputation. So the EPIC option, folks, had a dynamic study done by the Beacon Hill Institute, and I'm going to read you a couple of their conclusions as to what the EPIC option would do for the state. It would grow the state's population in 26 by 1.9% and 2.3% in and by 2030. Personal consumption would increase by 3.8% and 7.2% respectively. Net employment in 26, it would create 47,154 jobs, and in the year 30, 58,065 jobs. Investment increase would be 8.6 and 10.2 respectively. Real inflation adjusted income increased by 9.6 billion and 12.7 billion. Now here's one that you get your attention. State real inflation adjusted gross domestic product would increase by $23.3 billion in 26 and $32.2 billion in 30. That's as much contribution to the economy as agriculture does today. And the rate would be 7.23%, and the income tax rate would be 0. The property tax rate would be 0. But do we talk about those things here? No. No, what we talk about and what we spend thousands of hours doing is doing bills like 754 that supposedly is going to move us lower in the overtaxed states. So let me read some of the things in the conclusion of what EPIC will do. Tax policies matter significantly for their effects on the state's ability to provide environment of conducive economic growth. Public finance economists recognize that taxes impose an excess burden or dead weight loss on the economy. Any move toward a tax reform must consider the fact that higher tax rates reduce the tax base and increase the dead loss. The goal of a viable tax system should be to ensure not only fairness, but also efficiency. The argument that a consumption tax is superior to an income tax has a long history. The reason it is because income tax, it taxes savings twice. Once when you earn the income and saved, and again when the taxpayer gets the return from the savings. The state can eliminate this discrimination by taxing households on what they consume rather than what they earn. The consumption tax is pro-savings, pro-investment, therefore it is pro-growth. Replacing all state taxes or income taxes, including inheritance tax, and the state sales tax and use tax, and all local state and all local property tax with a revenue neutral consumption tax would generate billions of dollars in investment, real disposable incomes, and the state domestic product and growth of the state domestic product. Moreover, the consumption tax rate creates thousands of jobs. This is a very important statement, the last one that I will make. The consumption tax exception on used goods is an additional economic boost to low income and middle income citizens who purchase a significant amount of goods as used items. But we don't have a discussion about fixing the problem. We have a discussion about how we can put a Band-Aid on it so we can come back next year and talk about it again. So go to the website, epicoption.org, look at the information I just shared with you, and if you don't think that's the real solution, I will be shocked. Because what we're doing here is a definition of stupidity. Keep doing the same things over and over.
Senator Raybold, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. We always look at our rankings as business leaders. How do we compare with other states on a whole array of taxes? It's not just property taxes, it's corporate taxes, it's individual income taxes, and how do we rate? And the sad truth is Nebraska doesn't rate very well. And the Achilles heel in that ranking has to do with our property taxes. That really just sinks our ranking, even though the state of Nebraska comes in like the top 5 when it comes to our public education. These are things that we're truly proud of. But I think when all the chambers talk about that, like, oh gosh, we gotta be more competitive. We've got to do better on our property taxes, our income taxes, corporate taxes. Well, yeah, they're right. But I think what they miss the mark on and why it skews to make us look so bad is our property taxes. How do we know that? We know that because Nebraska ranks 49th in all the states in the United States because our property taxes go towards our public education. And we're trying to correct that in this budget. The governor's initiatives are trying to do just that. And that's a good thing. That is a good thing and hopefully that's gonna make us win. That is gonna boost us up. What we know for a fact is lowering our corporate income taxes in LB 873 2022. How many new businesses have come to our state? I've asked that of all my colleagues. Can you show me a state where once they start cutting the corporate taxes, then just corporations are just drawn there and you kind of have to you're overrun by all the corporations that want to come to your state? Not true. I read you that one statistic. Business formations within the last 4 quarters are down 3.6%. Now, we're comparing that to the other colleagues in the Midwest that have done that race to the bottom of lowering their corporate income taxes and their individual income taxes. Well, they're up 1.2%, but we're down, even though we have lowered our corporate income taxes. That should give us pause. What are we doing? And I wanted to continue to read from the article. It says, while it's true the revenue picture over the past couple of years has been very different. We are so flush with CARES money, ARPA funds. It has been different than when we started in the legislature. It is such an anomaly that we're reluctant to accept it as our new normal. Maybe we're cynical. This is Senator Schumacher and Friesen. Maybe we're cynical, but we don't consider it a solid basis for ongoing spending decisions. I don't think that should be our case either. And let's see. I'm trying to, if you pull up my handout that I gave to everyone, you look on the back side and it shows what our general fund balance has been over the last 20 years. It's been right around 3.5%. And you can see from the graph as well that we're not hitting that mark in 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026. And so for those reasons, I think we should be a little bit more cautious on moving forward. We know that the LB 754 has provisions from 7 different bills that they all significantly impact our state's income. Thank you, Mr. President. And for that reason, we should proceed more cautiously. Going back to the article from Senator Schumacher and Friesen, they say, so not only is the legislature spending down the rainy day fund on a sunny day, but it is also reducing future tax revenue. And we just saw that yesterday. We just went into the rainy day fund, our cash reserves, and transferred over $170 million. Boom, right there. And this is a sunny day. We are flush with cash, yet we are going down that rabbit hole, knowing full well that these additional tax cuts, corporate, individual, are not sustainable. We're going in the wrong direction. I know Senator Conrad had spoken very eloquently about making sure that we do things that attract young families. And that's focusing on childcare tax credits. That's what the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce has come to the conclusion as well.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Duncan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And colleagues, I rise again in support of AM 1760, still with some concerns about LB 754. I don't plan on talking much more after this. I understand that we've had a long and robust conversation about this on general file, and we're going to continue to have conversations. But I did want to finish a couple of my thoughts that I had earlier, just to make sure that those things were clear in the record, because I do think it's important to discuss some of these numbers. And so what I just talked about is based on some analysis that's been done So that a family with an annual income of $70,000 could expect to see about a $370 tax cut, while a family in the top 20% earning $365,000 per year would expect to see a savings of nearly $6,000. That's a tax cut of more than 3 times greater for the family in the top 20% as a percentage of their annual income. And it's that as a percentage of their annual income that I think is so important. Obviously, I understand that if you pay more in taxes, you're going to see a larger tax break, just given by how much money you are spending. But what we should be analyzing and looking at is the percentage of the income and whether or not that is equitable and that is being appropriately distributed amongst the income brackets. And so, at least based on some of the preliminary numbers I've seen, I do have concerns that have been, I think, echoed by other folks, both in the committee hearings who are testifying, as well as here on the floor, that there might be some issues with the way that's being distributed. And I just think it's important that we take that into consideration when we try to make sure that everyday Nebraskans, like the folks that I represent in Northeast Lincoln, are going to see a good portion of that tax cut. And so that's generally my concern. In addition to that, the lowest paid 20% of Nebraskans with an average annual income of $17,000 could expect to see a cut of about $5. And I think that's an important number. We talk a lot about how our tax brackets do encompass a large portion of Nebraska, but the lowest paid 20% of Nebraskans have an average annual income of $17,000. And so I think that's a really important thing for us to keep in mind. Again, sometimes we get into a bubble and we're somewhat myopic when we think about the people that these are helping or hurting. But there's a large portion of people out there who really don't make as much money as I think we think. And so when we talk about who these tax cuts help and who they're going to benefit, it's important to know that there's a 20% chunk of our state that's going to see a $5 reduction in taxes here. So I just want to make sure I highlight that. One of the other things that I know has been discussed at least a little bit by Senator Raybould, and I just wanted to touch on it briefly, is the corporate income tax reduction. I do agree, having looked at the numbers with Senator Von Gillern, that I was surprised at the chunk of our total revenues that are derived from corporate income tax. It's less than I maybe anticipated, but that doesn't mean it's insignificant. And I think that when we're looking at reductions for corporate tax rates, we need to look at 2 major components. We need to look at A, is this benefiting Nebraskans? And B, is this going to affect our long-term sustainability overall? According to some of the studies I've also looked at, it's estimated that at least 83% of the state revenue cut as a result of the corporate income tax cuts go to non-residents. And that's because Nebraska, the way that we do corporate tax here, we're a single sales factor state, essentially meaning the corporations who do business in the state only pay taxes on the portion of sales made in the state. And so if you do business here, you pay taxes here. But that doesn't mean you have to be headquartered here to pay corporate taxes, right? So a corporation could be headquartered in Delaware. They could have their physical location in California, but if they do business in Nebraska, they're going to see a reduction in their corporate income tax based on this. But that doesn't mean that money is going to flow to Nebraskans. It doesn't mean that money is going to flow back into the state, nor does it necessarily mean that it's going to stimulate the economy any further, which I believe is the intent of this. Thank you, Mr. President. I also believe that it's been generally agreed upon. The Congressional Budget Office and even the co-founder of Moody's have found that corporate income tax cuts are not an effective way of stimulating the economy. They found that during the Great Recession, cuts to the corporate income tax rate created just 32 cents in economic activity for every dollar spent. They found, on the other hand, that spending on SNAP has an economic multiplier of $1.71. So we know there are more effective ways to stimulate the economy than reducing the corporate tax rates. Again, colleagues, I just have some concerns about the long-term sustainability. I know there's others who disagree with that, but I do think we should be looking at how this affects our bottom line as a whole in the future, and we need to be fiscally responsible with our economic situation. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Raybould, you're recognized. This is your last opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I concur with a lot of the things that Senator Duncan has been saying. I don't believe it's sustainable, and I don't believe it's equitable either. I know that in earlier conversations when it was on the first round, I had discussions with Senator Linehan, and I said, how about we just pause the tax cuts for those top brackets? Let's focus on the middle brackets, lower income brackets. They're the ones I keep talking about. They're the ones that actually pour that money back in our economy. And Senator Linehan said, yes, we can do that, but then we have to take away the child care tax credit. Well, we should be doing both. We should be giving the tax credits to those who are more likely to pour that money back in our economy, for the families that need that child care tax credit so that they can not be struggling so much. And so those are some of the things that I think we're kind of missing the mark on as a state that tries to be focused on what is going to benefit our Nebraska families. And those are the elements. We've heard the business chambers of commerce talk about that, from Lincoln to Omaha to greater Nebraska, et cetera. So I know that I'll probably have a chance to talk about this, but I know with my colleagues, they're just bullish on that forecast. That forecast is rosy, it's robust. We're going to be able to do everything we planned. Well, if that's the case, then why are you all afraid of putting in some triggers? Let's put some triggers. And I have a couple, well, actually 3 amendments talking about breaks and triggers, because any reasonable-minded person would like to do that. Why do we want to kick the can down the road and make sure that future senators are going to have their hands tied and going back to their constituents, which are large corporations and some of the highest donors, maybe to their campaign, and say, you know what? We cannot give you that tax cut that we have scheduled. We're sorry about that. We just don't have the revenue to sustain it. I know that's wildly unpopular to be able to do that, but I think if we make it more of an objective decision-making process, make it a good fiscal policy decision going forward, that's what we should be doing. We should be looking at the triggers, good economic indicators in good times or in bad, that will help us make better decisions. And I didn't want to go down this rabbit hole, but I think I shall, because I probably only have a minute, but I don't want to belabor it too much. But I know that we think what we're doing is great corporate policy, but we've heard from several businesses that they are concerned about some of the other bills that we're proposing. And Tim Burke, who is the president of the Omaha Chamber of Commerce, spoke. And he issued that broad statement on Wednesday, calling on state lawmakers to pursue legislation that is supportive and inclusive and not harmful in efforts to recruit and retain our needed workers. Exclusivity is the right thing to do, said the statement, citing recommendations from statewide economic development report from 2021, which is my favorite. It's called Blueprint Nebraska. They targeted inclusivity and diversity. Burke said this chamber statement came after business leaders expressed concerns about bills viewed as sexist, racist, or homophobic working their way through the legislature this year. And initially, the chamber had chosen not to participate in this discussion, but they realized that they couldn't stand back any longer because they've already had calls about conventions and other company commitments that they're going to be backing out. So what we do has consequences. If we're thinking, thank you, Mr. President. If we think that what we're doing is going to be the right thing, and by lowering corporate taxes, we've already done that. We're still 3.7% below what we've done in previous years of company formations. So I want to just talk again about the upcoming amendments on 3 opportunities for us to make good conservative fiscal policy. The first is a break. It's a break where after 2 years, 2023 and 2024, we stop on any further income tax cuts or corporate tax cuts. We stop and we reassess. Are we where we need to be in our economic forecast? Are we where we need to be with our general funds? Are we where we need to be with our cash receipts, our cash reserves? Thank you, Mr. President.
See no one left in the queue. Senator Linehan, you are recognized to close on AM 1760.
Thank you, Mr. President. So we have to vote for this amendment. It's actually lowering the amount of tax cuts. So I can't imagine, so I'd ask your green vote on the amendment. And And I want to call the House and roll call vote in regular order.
Thank you, Senator. There's been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
16 nays, 3 nays, place House under call, Mr. President.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Dorn, Wishart, McKinney, Vargas, Walls, McDonald, Ibaugh, and Brewer, please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. Senators Dorn, Wishart, Vargas, and Brewer, please return to the chamber and record your presence. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. Members, the question is the adoption of AM 1760. And there is a request for a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Aguilar, voting yes. Senator Albright, Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Armendariz, voting yes. Senator Ballard, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Boston, Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Breezy, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Conrad, voting yes. Senator Day, voting yes. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator DeKay, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator Dover, Senator Dungan, voting yes. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Frederickson, voting yes. Senator Holleran, voting yes. Senator Hansen, voting yes. Senator Hardin, voting yes. Senator Holcroft, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hunt, not voting. Senator Ibach, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Kauth, voting yes. Senator Linehan, voting yes. Senator Lippincott, voting yes. Senator Lowe, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McKinney, voting yes. Senator Mosier, voting yes. Senator Merman, voting yes. Senator Raybold, not voting. Senator Reapy, voting yes. Senator Sanders, voting yes. Senator Slama, Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Von Gillen, voting yes. Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Wayne, voting yes. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Vote is 41 ayes, no nays. Mr. President, on adoption of the amendment.
AM 1760 is adopted. Mr. Clerk, for items. And I raise the call.
Mr. President, some items quickly. Amendments to be printed from Senator Linehan to LB 754. Motion to be printed from Senator Hunt to LB 574. Additionally, new LR 150 from Senator DeBoer. That'll be referred to the executive board. And LR 51 for Senator DeBoer as well, also referred to the executive board. Concerning LB 754, Mr. President, Senator Conrad would move to amend with AM 1762.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I don't plan to belabor the point, but I do want to provide an opportunity for the body to vote on a very straightforward amendment. Let me state at the outset, this amendment does not change the bottom line by 1 penny in terms of the tax implications for this measure. So this is a $0 amendment. What the amendment does is it directs $2.5 million that we have dedicated to corporations to incentivize childcare directly to families. So under the child tax credit component that was recently revised due to fiscal constraints, and these are general estimates as people are trying to get the best numbers, that might help about 10 to 15,000 families perhaps get that child care credit. With my amendment, for $0 on the bottom line, we could help another 1,000 to 2,000 children access that benefit. It would go directly to families. It doesn't impact the bottom line, and it would help them to meet the ever increasing costs of childcare. We have heard that we need to adopt this package to ensure that we're competitive in terms of our overall tax structure. I understand that perspective, but I also want to note that we should also be looking at an expanded child care tax credit or a child tax credit and an EITC to do the same. For example, and I have measures on both of these pending before the Revenue Committee. In Nebraska, our current EITC is only 10% of the federal credit. Our neighboring states of Kansas have a 17% EITC. Iowa has a 15% EITC. Missouri's runs about 10 to 20%, and Colorado at 20%. So when we're talking about competitiveness, we also need to ensure equity, and we need to ensure updates for low-income working families. The EITC is a well-established bipartisan solution that has support from the business community and poverty advocates, because because it rewards work and helps family meet their bottom lines. We could address and make competitive our EITC for less than $20 million to meet where our sister states are at. That has not been advanced as part of this revenue package. I pledge to continue working with the Revenue Committee to address that next year. But all I'm asking in terms of this simple technical amendment is to divert $2.5 million that is going to corporations directly to families, in recognition and in light of the fact that the corpus of LB 754, a significant part of this price tag and program design is probably a historic, I think it's fair to say a historic corporate tax cut. So the Nebraska Legislature has been exceedingly generous in terms of its bestowing corporate tax benefits on our corporate citizens in this measure, and that should be sufficient. We shouldn't also have to steal $2.5 million away from families for childcare. So I'm happy to answer any questions and would appreciate your green vote and look forward to the debate. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Bostar, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Senator Conrad, for your amendment and talking about your motivations behind it, because I broadly agree with them. However, I won't be voting on AM 1762 for the really pretty simple reason that getting this bill to where it is today, and frankly, protecting the funding in it to such an extent that we even have the 25 million currently to work with, has been a collective effort. There are a lot of stakeholders involved, and there are a lot of views about what this legislation should look like. And this is where we've landed. I have my favorite parts of the bill, and to be honest, I think they're in line with what Senator Conrad's are. But we did a lot of work to get here. We worked with a lot of people to get here, and so for that reason, I will not be voting on AM 1762, and I just wanted to get up and kind of provide that explanation. But I appreciate Senator Conrad's passion for this issue. It's extremely important. I share that with her, and I look forward to working with Senator Conrad going forward, because in my view, this is the beginning. This is the start of legislation like this that we need to be doing to make sure that Nebraska is a place where, frankly, it's easier to raise a family, because right now it's hard. It's hard, it's expensive. If you're if you're in a position where you need childcare, you often can't find it. And if you can find it, you often can't afford it. So this doesn't solve every problem. This is one step, I think, in the right direction. And I look forward to taking many more steps with all of you. With that, thank you all very much.
Thank you, Senator Bostar. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Conrad, you're recognized to close.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you to Senator Bostar for his remarks. I just wanted to also remind folks that, again, more and more states are adopting child care tax credits and child tax credits, including California, Colorado, Idaho, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Mexico, New York, and Oklahoma. Montana's Republican governor also proposed a child tax credit for the youngest of children in his state. So this is an area of growing bipartisan